Hey there. Welcome to Nocturne Sleep Crime. I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know many of you use this video to fall asleep. So, before you get cozy, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd love to hear from you. Story 1. The signal appeared at exactly 12:03 a.m. Every television in the quiet town of Hollow Ridge flickered at the same moment. Phones buzzed. Radios crackled. Even smart speakers activated without command. The broadcast interrupted everything. Late-night sitcom reruns, news channels, music playlists, security feeds. Then the screen went black. Static hissed softly, and a voice spoke. "You have 24 hours." The words were calm, mechanical, almost emotionless. "Find the girl before the clock runs out, or the next broadcast will show how she dies." The screen flashed once. A single image appeared. A teenage girl sat in a dimly lit room, bound to a chair. Her face was pale, streaked with tears. Behind her, painted across the wall in dark red letters, was a symbol. A broken clock, its hands spinning backward. Then the broadcast ended. Every screen returned to normal programming, as if nothing had happened. Except for one thing. The girl had been identified within minutes. Her name was Emily Harper, age 17. Missing for 6 hours, and Hollow Ridge was about to become the center of one of the most disturbing criminal investigations in modern history. Detective Marcus Hale was already awake when his phone exploded with emergency alerts. He had never liked small towns. They gave people the illusion of safety while hiding secrets in plain sight. Hollow Ridge was no different. Quiet streets, friendly neighbors, and the comforting rhythm of predictable lives. But Marcus had learned something after 20 years in law enforcement. The quieter the town, the louder the darkness beneath it. He grabbed his coat and keys, rushing toward his car as his partner called. "You've seen the broadcast?" Detective Elena Cruz asked. "I'm heading to the station," Marcus said. "Tell me everything." Emily Harper, high school senior. Last seen leaving track practice. Her parents reported her missing around 6 yesterday evening. "And the broadcast?" "Every device in town picked it up simultaneously," Elena said. "Cybercrime teams say the signal hijacked multiple networks. Whoever did this is extremely advanced." Marcus frowned as he started his engine. Or extremely prepared. The Hollow Ridge Police Department was chaos when Marcus arrived. Officers shouted updates across the bullpen. Multiple agencies were already involved. FBI agents were setting up equipment in the conference room. News vans crowded the parking lot outside, their satellite dishes angled toward the sky like vultures circling a dying animal. Elena stood beside a whiteboard filled with photographs of Emily Harper. She was smiling in every picture. Track uniform, family barbecue, school prom, normal teenage life frozen in time. Marcus studied the broadcast still image pinned at the center. The broken clock symbol stared back at him. "Any idea what that means?" he asked. Elena shook her head. "Not yet, but it gets worse." She handed him a tablet. Marcus watched a compilation of security footage from across town. Every screen glitching simultaneously. Every device switching to the same broadcast. "This wasn't random," Marcus said quietly. "This was targeted. Planned." "Exactly," Elena replied. "And the kidnapper wants the town involved." Marcus leaned against the table, arms folded. "Then this isn't just about Emily," he said. Elena nodded. "This is a performance." Emily's parents were waiting in an interrogation room when Marcus arrived. Her mother, Laura Harper, looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her father, Daniel Harper, stared blankly at the table, his hands clenched tightly together. Marcus sat across from them. "We're going to find your daughter," he said gently. "But we need to understand everything about her last day." Laura nodded quickly, tears spilling down her face. "She left track practice at 5. She texted me saying she was walking home. It's only 3 blocks. Marcus glanced at Elena. "Did she make it home?" Daniel shook his head. "She never arrived." "Any enemies?" Marcus asked. "Boyfriend? Problems at school?" "No," Laura whispered. She was a good kid. Everyone loved her." Marcus had heard that sentence too many times before. Everyone loved her. It usually meant someone loved her too much. The first lead came from a traffic camera near the high school. Emily was seen walking alone down Maple Street. At 5:18 p.m., a white delivery van pulled beside her. The footage froze, then glitched, then cut to static. Elena cursed under her breath. They hacked the city cameras too. Marcus stared at the frozen frame. Enhance the license plate. Already tried, Elena said. It's blurred intentionally. Marcus leaned closer to the screen. The van's side panel displayed a logo, partially visible beneath the distortion. He narrowed his eyes. Zoom there. Elena adjusted the image. The logo resembled a faded repair company emblem, but only half of it remained visible. And beneath it, another broken clock symbol had been spray-painted across the door. Marcus stepped back slowly. This wasn't just a kidnapping, he said. This was a message. By noon, the town was in panic. Parents pulled children from school. Businesses closed early. Rumors spread like wildfire through social media. People speculated about serial killers, cults, even government conspiracies. The mayor demanded answers during a press conference that was broadcast nationally. Marcus watched from the station, arms crossed as reporters shouted questions. They want fear, he muttered. Elena glanced at him. Who? The kidnapper. The broadcast wasn't just a threat. It was psychological warfare. Before Elena could respond, an officer rushed into the room. Detectives, you need to see this. They followed him to the digital forensics lab. A technician pointed at a laptop screen displaying a countdown timer. 23 hours, 7 minutes, and 12 seconds. This appeared on every emergency broadcast system server 5 minutes ago, the technician said. Elena's stomach dropped. A timer? Marcus nodded grimly. The 24 hours just started. The FBI behavioral unit arrived that afternoon. Lead profiler Dr. Nathan Keller presented his early assessment. This perpetrator isn't just seeking attention, Keller explained. He's orchestrating control. The town is part of the game. The countdown forces participation. Marcus studied the broken clock symbol displayed on the screen. Meaning? Keller adjusted his glasses. It suggests obsession with time. Possibly punishment. Possibly revenge. Whoever did this believes they're correcting something, reversing something. Marcus exchanged a glance with Elena. Or replaying something. At 4:45 p.m., a second message arrived. Not a broadcast. A package. It was delivered directly to the police station lobby by an unknown courier who vanished before security could identify him. Inside the box was a digital tablet and a note. Clue number 1. Time remembers what people forget. Marcus activated the tablet. A video began playing. Emily appeared again. This time, she was crying harder, struggling against her restraints. Behind her, a ticking clock echoed loudly in the background. Then the video cut to a photograph. An abandoned building at the edge of town. Stamped across the image. Start here. The warehouse was surrounded within 30 minutes. Marcus and Elena led the entry team. The air inside smelled of dust and rusted metal. Flashlights sliced through the darkness as officers searched every corner. Clear. Clear. Nothing here. Marcus frowned. Keep searching. Then Elena noticed something near the center of the floor. A metal hatch. They opened it slowly. Inside was a ladder descending into darkness. Marcus signaled for backup lights. They climbed down carefully. At the bottom, they found a small underground room. Empty, except for one object sitting in the middle. A television. It flickered to life the moment Marcus stepped closer. Static cleared. The kidnapper appeared on screen for the first time. His face hidden behind a black mask shaped like a shattered clock face. You're slower than I expected, he said calmly. Marcus stepped forward. Where is Emily? The masked figure tilted his head slightly. You have 20 hours left, he replied. Tick-tock. The screen switched to another image. A map of Hollow Ridge. Several locations were marked with red circles, and one circle blinked repeatedly. Before Marcus could react, the television shut off. Behind them, the hatch slammed closed, and a mechanical ticking sound echoed through the underground chamber. Marcus's pulse spiked. Elena. Yeah. He stared at the walls. They didn't leave this empty. The ticking grew louder. Faster. Closer. And then Marcus spotted it. A digital timer mounted above the ladder. His voice sharpened instantly. Bomb. Everyone out. Officers scrambled toward the ladder as the timer raced downward. Elena climbed first, shouting orders above. Marcus followed, adrenaline flooding his veins as the seconds bled away. They burst out of the hatch just as the explosion ripped through the underground chamber, sending fire and debris blasting upward through the warehouse floor. Glass shattered, metal twisted, smoke swallowed the building. Marcus collapsed outside, coughing, ears ringing violently. Elena grabbed his arm. "You okay?" He nodded weakly, staring back at the burning warehouse. The kidnapper wasn't just playing games. He was escalating, and the countdown had only begun. Miles away, inside a hidden room filled with monitors broadcasting the chaos across Hollow Ridge, the masked figure watched calmly. Emily Harper sobbed in the chair beside him. The broken clock symbol glowed faintly behind her. The figure adjusted one of the monitors, zooming in on Marcus Hale standing outside the burning building. 20 hours, he whispered softly. Let's see how much time justice really needs. Smoke still rose from the warehouse ruins as emergency crews fought to contain the fire. The explosion had left the structure gutted, its metal skeleton twisted and glowing under flashing red and blue lights. Officers rushed around securing the perimeter while bomb technicians combed through debris for fragments that might explain how close the task force had come to losing lives. Detective Marcus Hale stood near an ambulance, wiping soot from his face. His ears still rang faintly from the blast. Across from him, Elena Cruz argued with a fire marshal, demanding priority access to the site once it cooled. "He wanted us there," Marcus muttered, watching the smoldering building. Elena crossed her arms. "Yeah, and he wanted to prove he controls the clock." Marcus glanced at his watch. The countdown had already burned through nearly 4 hours. 20 hours left, he said grimly. "We don't chase clues. We sprint." The map of red circles. Back at the station, the command center buzzed with frantic energy. Technicians enhanced the image of the map displayed during the kidnapper's video. 5 red circles marked different locations across Hollow Ridge. Each circle blinked slowly like a pulse. Dr. Nathan Keller studied the projection carefully. "He wants you to visit these locations," Keller said. "They're symbolic, not random." Elena leaned closer. "Symbolic how?" Keller adjusted his glasses. Kidnappers obsessed with time often connect crimes to historical events or personal grievances. Each location might represent a step in his narrative. Marcus nodded. "Then we check all 5." Simultaneously, teams were dispatched immediately. Marcus and Elena took the blinking circle closest to Emily's last known route, an abandoned community theater on Pine Street. The Silent Theater. The Pine Street Theater had closed nearly 10 years earlier after funding cuts. The faded marquee still displayed letters from its last performance, The Time Traveler's Wife. Most of the bulbs were burned out, leaving only a faint glow from the remaining ones. Marcus pushed the front doors open slowly. Dust swirled under their flashlights. "Creepy coincidence," Elena said quietly, glancing at the title above the entrance. Marcus didn't respond. His instincts told him the title wasn't a coincidence at all. Inside, the theater seats were coated in dust. Torn velvet curtains hung loosely around the stage. The smell of mildew and old wood filled the air. "Spread out," Marcus ordered. Officers began searching rows, backstage areas, and projection rooms. Elena stepped onto the stage, scanning the floor. Something glinted under her light. "Marcus, over here." He joined her, crouching beside a metal object lying at center stage. It was an antique pocket watch. Its glass face was cracked, and its hands spun backward. Marcus carefully opened the watch. Inside the lid, an engraving read, "For Lillian. Time took you too soon." Elena frowned. "Who's Lillian?" Marcus slipped the watch into an evidence bag. "Someone important." The projection room discovery. Minutes later, a shout came from upstairs. "Detectives, you need to see this." Marcus and Elena rushed to the projection booth. A portable digital projector had been installed recently, its cables leading to a small laptop sitting on a dusty table. A video file was paused on screen. Marcus pressed play. Grainy footage appeared, black and white security camera recordings from inside the theater, dated 1987. A young girl stood on the same stage where Elena had found the watch. She looked frightened, glancing toward the empty audience seats. The timestamp flickered briefly before disappearing. Then the footage cut abruptly. Elena's voice trembled slightly. That girl, she looks about Emily's age. Marcus turned to the technician behind them. Run facial recognition. The technician nodded quickly. Within seconds, the system produced a result. Lillian Brooks, age 16. Missing since October 1987. Case unsolved. Elena stared at Marcus. He's recreating an old kidnapping. Marcus's jaw tightened. Not recreating. Continuing. The forgotten case. They rushed to the archives room, pulling dusty files from decades-old storage. The Lillian Brooks case file was thin, shockingly thin for a missing child investigation. Marcus flipped through reports rapidly. Lillian disappeared after rehearsing at this theater, he read. Last seen leaving through the stage exit. Witnesses reported a suspicious man near the alley, but he was never identified. Elena studied the photographs of Lillian. She looks just like Emily, she whispered. Marcus nodded slowly. Same age, same activities, same route home. Keller entered the room behind them. This isn't random victim selection, he said. The kidnapper is following a script from the past. Elena turned sharply. You think he's connected to Lillian's disappearance? Keller's expression darkened. I think he might be the same person. The second clue arrives. At exactly 3:03 p.m., every phone in the command center vibrated simultaneously. A new video message. Marcus opened it immediately. The masked figure appeared again, standing beside Emily. Her eyes were swollen from crying. A digital clock behind her now displayed. 19 hours. You've discovered Lillian, the figure said calmly. Good. Time is revealing its secrets. Marcus stepped closer to the screen. What do you want? The masked figure tilted his head. Justice. The screen flashed images rapidly. Old newspaper clippings about Lillian Brooks, headlines reading. Police fail to find missing girl. Case goes cold. Family demands answers. Then the masked figure spoke again. You failed her. Now you must not fail Emily. The video cut to another photograph. A cemetery on the outskirts of Hollow Ridge. Stamped across the image. Clue number 2, time buries the truth. Racing to the cemetery. The cemetery sat atop a hill overlooking town. Rain clouds gathered overhead as Marcus and Elena arrived with tactical teams. Rows of weathered tombstones stretched across the landscape like silent witnesses to forgotten lives. Elena, find Lillian's grave, Marcus said. Officers spread out, scanning headstones row by row. A shout came from near the back fence. Found it! Marcus and Elena rushed over. Lillian Brooks' headstone stood tilted slightly, moss growing along its base. Fresh dirt surrounded it. Elena's pulse quickened. He's been here recently. Marcus knelt, brushing soil aside. Beneath the headstone, he found a small metal box buried shallowly in the ground. He opened it carefully. Inside was a cassette tape, and another broken pocket watch. The tape recording. Back at the station, technicians transferred the cassette audio into digital format. Everyone gathered silently as Marcus pressed play. Static crackled. Then a young girl's voice spoke. I don't know where I am. He says nobody remembers me anymore. The room froze. Elena covered her mouth. The recording continued, filled with sobs and whispered pleas for help. Then a man's voice entered, calm, patient, almost soothing. You will be remembered, he said, but only when time is corrected. The tape ended abruptly. Marcus turned toward Keller. That's him. 39 years ago. Keller nodded grimly. This isn't about ransom. It's about rewriting history. The realization. Elena paced the room anxiously. If he kidnapped Lillian and got away with it, he thinks he's punishing the town for forgetting her. Marcus stared at the broken watches lined across the evidence table. He's not punishing the town, he said quietly. He's punishing time itself. Elena stopped walking. What does that mean? Marcus picked up the watch engraved with Lillian's name. It means Emily isn't his first victim, and she won't be his last if we fail. The clock keeps ticking. Another update arrived from cybercrime units. They had traced fragments of the broadcast signal to an abandoned radio tower outside town. But before Marcus could mobilize a team, the command center screens flickered again. Another countdown appeared. 17 hours and 45 minutes. And beneath it, a message. One victim remembered, for truths remain buried. Marcus felt a chill crawl up his spine. "This is bigger than 2 kidnappings," he said. Elena nodded slowly. "How many girls are we talking about?" Marcus didn't answer, because deep down, he was afraid the number might be far worse than they imagined. The shadow watches, hidden somewhere within Hollow Ridge. The masked figure watched the investigation unfold across dozens of surveillance monitors. Old newspaper clippings covered the walls around him, each featuring a missing girl from different decades. Emily sat silently beside him, trembling. He adjusted another broken clock hanging above her. 17 hours, he whispered softly. The past is finally catching up. Marcus stood inside the command center, staring at the growing evidence board. Photographs of missing girls from 1987, 1994, 2001, 2013, all unsolved, all connected by the same broken clock symbol. And now, Emily Harper. Elena stepped beside him. "Marcus, what if he's recreating every disappearance he committed?" Marcus swallowed hard. Then Emily isn't just running out of time. He turned toward the countdown, ticking relentlessly across the screen. "She's the final chapter." The evidence board had grown into a wall of nightmares. Photographs of missing girls stretched across nearly 2 decades. Each face was frozen in time. Yearbook portraits, family snapshots, sports team photos, birthday celebrations. Smiling, laughing, alive. Now they were all ghosts. Detective Marcus Hale stood in front of the board, arms folded tightly as the overhead fluorescent lights flickered. Red strings connected names, dates, locations, and broken clock symbols drawn beside each victim. Emily Harper sat at the center. 16 hours remained on the countdown. Elena Cruz entered the room carrying a stack of files. Her expression was pale, shaken. "You need to see this," she said quietly. Marcus didn't move. "Tell me we found something useful." Elena placed the files on the table. "I think we found everything." The pattern emerges. They gathered around the conference table while Dr. Nathan Keller projected a timeline across the screen. 5 disappearances. 5 decades. Lillian Brooks, 1987. Carla Jennings, 1994. Tessa Monroe, 2001. Natalie Rhodes, 2013. Emily Harper, present day. Each victim was between 16 and 18 years old. Each vanished while walking home alone. Each case had one overlooked detail buried deep in the archives. Marcus leaned forward. "What detail?" Keller clicked the screen, zooming into an aerial map of Hollow Ridge. 5 red dots appeared. Then lines connected them. A spiral. Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. "He's been mapping the town with victims." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. And Emily completes the pattern. The forgotten investigation. Marcus flipped through Carla Jennings' case file. Unlike Lillian's, this one was thicker, but full of dead ends. Carla disappeared after leaving a late-night tutoring session, Marcus read. Witnesses reported seeing a maintenance truck near the school parking lot. Elena grabbed another file. Tessa Monroe vanished after a school theater rehearsal. Marcus froze. "Theater again," he said. Elena nodded slowly. And Natalie Rhodes disappeared after volunteering at a community radio station. Marcus looked toward Keller. The radio tower cybercrime traced the broadcast signal to. "Was Natalie's last known location," Keller finished. Silence swallowed the room. The kidnapper wasn't just repeating crimes. He was revisiting memories. The secret police report. An officer burst into the room holding a dusty archive folder. "Detective Hale, we found something buried in the 1987 investigation." Marcus took the folder carefully. Inside was a confidential report never included in the official case file. The report described a suspect interviewed briefly after Lillian Brooks disappeared. Name, Elias Voss. Occupation, volunteer stage technician at Pine Street Theater. Status, questioned and released due to lack of evidence. Marcus stared at the name. "Elias Voss," he repeated slowly. Elena frowned. Why was he cleared so quickly? Marcus flipped through the report. His eyes widened. Because the lead investigator vouched for him personally. "Who was the investigator?" Elena asked. Marcus turned the page. His chest tightened. Detective Harold Briggs. The town's buried scandal. Elena's eyebrows lifted. "Briggs? The retired police chief." Marcus nodded slowly. Harold Briggs had served as Hollow Ridge's police chief for nearly 30 years before retiring as a local hero. His reputation was flawless, untouchable. Marcus grabbed his coat. "We're going to talk to him." The old hero. Harold Briggs lived in a quiet farmhouse on the edge of town. The property was lined with antique clocks mounted along the porch walls, dozens of them ticking out of sync. Marcus noticed immediately. "Either he loves clocks," Elena whispered, "or someone wants him to," Marcus finished. Briggs opened the door before they knocked, as if he had been expecting them. His silver hair was neatly combed. His eyes were sharp despite his age. "I was wondering when you'd come," he said calmly. Marcus stepped inside cautiously. "You remember Elias Voss?" Briggs hesitated for half a second. "Of course," he said. "Strange kid, obsessed with time and mechanical devices. Why did you clear him?" Elena asked. Briggs sighed heavily, walking toward a shelf filled with trophies and commendations. "Because there was no evidence," he said. Marcus leaned closer. "Or because you were protecting someone?" Briggs turned sharply. "I dedicated my life to protecting this town." Marcus held up the old report. "You ignored multiple witness statements placing Voss near Lillian Brooks before she vanished." Briggs's face hardened. "Sometimes mistakes are made in investigations." Elena crossed her arms. 5 girls disappeared over 40 years. That's not a mistake. That's negligence." Briggs stared at the floor. Then quietly he said, "I thought he stopped." The chilling truth. Marcus's pulse quickened. "You knew he did it." Briggs sat down slowly, his shoulders sagging under invisible weight. "Elias Voss lost his sister when he was a child," Briggs said. "She drowned during a storm. He blamed the town, blamed emergency responders, blamed everyone who failed to save her in time." Elena exchanged a glance with Marcus. "He became obsessed with time?" she asked. Briggs nodded. He believed people only cared about tragedies when they were recent. Once enough time passed, victims were forgotten. He wanted to force the town to remember. Marcus's voice hardened. "So you let him go?" Briggs swallowed. "There wasn't enough proof. And I believed he was harmless. Just a grieving man stuck in the past." Marcus slammed his hand on the table. "He kidnapped 5 girls, Briggs." The old chief flinched. "I didn't know it would continue," he whispered. "The missing records." Marcus leaned forward. "Where is Elias Voss now?" Briggs shook his head. "He disappeared from Hollow Ridge in the early 90s. Changed identities multiple times. We lost track of him." Elena's voice sharpened. "Then how is he back?" Briggs gestured toward the ticking clocks around the room. "Because Hollow Ridge never truly escaped him." The third broadcast. Back at the station, alarms blared as every screen flickered simultaneously again. Marcus and Elena rushed inside. The masked figure appeared on screen, standing closer to Emily than before. Her eyes were red and swollen, exhaustion written across her face. Behind them, multiple broken clocks hung across the wall. "You spoke to Harold Briggs," the figure said calmly. Marcus stepped toward the monitor. "Let her go, Voss." The figure tilted his head. "You finally remember my name." The screen displayed old footage of Elias Voss as a young man working backstage at the Pine Street Theater. Smiling. Normal. Then the image glitched, returning to the masked figure. "You see, time erases guilt. Time erases responsibility. But I preserve it." Elena stepped forward. "You murdered innocent girls to make a point." "Not murdered," Voss corrected calmly. "Immortalized." Marcus's fists clenched. "Where is Emily?" The screen shifted to another photograph. An abandoned school building. Stamped across the image. Clue number 3. The past never graduates. The broadcast ended. The race intensifies. Marcus turned toward his team. "That school closed 15 years ago. It was converted into storage before being abandoned completely." Elena grabbed tactical gear. "Then we're going." Marcus checked the countdown displayed on the command center wall. 13 hours and 12 minutes. 13 hours left. The ghost school. The abandoned school loomed over a cracked parking lot, its windows shattered, its hallways swallowed by darkness. Marcus entered first, flashlight slicing through dust-filled air. Lockers lined the corridor, many hanging open like broken jaws. "Elena," Marcus whispered. "Yeah. Stay close. This place feels staged." As they reached the main hallway, Marcus noticed something chilling. Photographs taped inside the lockers. Pictures of each missing girl at different ages. Lillian, Carla, Tessa, Natalie, and finally, Emily. Elena's breath caught. He's been documenting them for decades. Marcus nodded slowly. This building isn't a clue. He looked around the dark hallway. It's a museum. The hidden classroom. At the end of the corridor, one classroom door stood slightly open. Light flickered inside. Marcus pushed it slowly. Inside, dozens of broken clocks covered the walls. Each clock displayed a different year corresponding to each disappearance. At the center of the room sat a projector playing silent footage of Hollow Ridge across different decades. Marcus stepped forward cautiously. Then he saw it. A desk with a photograph resting on top. It showed Elias Voss standing beside Detective Harold Briggs, decades earlier. Friends. Marcus's chest tightened. This goes deeper than we thought. Suddenly, a loud metallic clang echoed behind them as the classroom door slammed shut. The projector switched screens automatically. A countdown timer appeared. For minutes. Elena cursed. Another trap? Marcus scanned the room desperately. Find another exit. The timer dropped. 3:22. 3:21. 3:20. Smoke began seeping through vents above them. Marcus spotted a ventilation shaft behind the teacher's desk. Help me move this. They shoved the heavy desk aside, prying open the vent cover as the timer raced downward. Elena climbed first, pulling Marcus in just as flames erupted through the doorway below. They crawled through the narrow shaft, coughing as smoke filled the metal tunnel. Finally, they burst onto the school roof moments before the classroom exploded beneath them. Marcus collapsed onto the gravel rooftop, gasping for air. Elena lay beside him, eyes wide with adrenaline. This guy isn't just playing games, she said. He's erasing evidence while leading us forward. Marcus stared at the dark sky. And he's running out of patience. The kidnapper watches again. Inside his hidden control room, Elias Voss removed his mask briefly, staring at an old photograph of his drowned sister. Emily sobbed quietly beside him. He replaced the mask and adjusted the countdown timer mounted above her. 13 hours, he whispered. The ghosts of Hollow Ridge deserve to be remembered, and tonight, they finally will be. Marcus stood later that night inside the command center, staring at the wall of missing girls. Now he understood the truth. Voss wasn't just reliving his crimes. He was building toward something bigger. Elena approached quietly. What are you thinking? Marcus swallowed. I think Emily isn't the end of his spiral. He looked at the countdown clock. I think she's the grand finale. The command center felt colder than usual. No one spoke above a whisper. The air buzzed with tension as the countdown clock glowed across every monitor inside the Hollow Ridge Police Department. 11 hours 48 minutes and 32 seconds. Detective Marcus Hale stood in front of the evidence wall, staring at the spiral formed by the missing girls' cases. The red lines connecting them now looked less like an investigation and more like a ritual drawn in blood and time. Behind him, Elena Cruz placed 2 cups of untouched coffee on the table. You haven't slept, she said quietly. Marcus didn't turn around. Neither have you. Elena leaned beside him, arms crossed. You said Emily might be his grand finale, she said. What does that mean? Marcus exhaled slowly. It means Voss isn't just reliving the past anymore. He pointed at the spiral pattern. He's finishing it. The spiral revealed. Dr. Nathan Keller stepped forward, activating a 3D projection above the conference table. The spiral expanded outward, mapping each kidnapping location across Hollow Ridge. Elena was right earlier, Keller said. Each victim represents a point in Voss's psychological timeline. But Marcus, look at this. He rotated the projection. The spiral wasn't random. It converged toward one central location. Marcus's stomach dropped as the projection zoomed in. The location sat at the exact center of Hollow Ridge, the Old Town Square. Elena, Marcus whispered. The clock tower, she finished. The heart of Hollow Ridge. The Hollow Ridge Clock Tower had stood for over a century. It was the town's most recognizable landmark, towering above shops, restaurants, and city offices. The tower's bell rang every hour, its echo reaching nearly every neighborhood. Marcus stared at the projection, realization spreading across his face like frost. Voss's obsession isn't just about victims, he said. It's about the town's sense of time itself. Keller nodded. The spiral ends where time is controlled. Elena looked toward the countdown. He's planning something at the tower. Marcus shook his head slowly. Not something. He pointed to Emily's photograph. Everything. The archived blueprint. Cybercrime teams uncovered something buried in municipal records. Original blueprints for the clock tower renovation completed 12 years earlier. Marcus studied the schematics carefully. Hidden maintenance tunnels ran beneath the tower, connecting to the sewer and electrical systems throughout the square. He could access the tower without anyone seeing him, Elena said. Marcus nodded grimly. And rig it for a broadcast across the entire country. The fourth broadcast. At exactly 10:59 a.m., every screen inside the command center flickered again. The masked face of Elias Voss appeared once more. Behind him, Emily sat chained to a metal chair, her face pale with exhaustion. The digital clock above her displayed 10 hours and 45 minutes. You're getting closer, Voss said calmly. The spiral always leads home. Marcus stepped toward the screen. You want attention? You've got it. Let her go. Voss tilted his head slightly. Attention fades. Memory fades. But public execution, that lasts forever. Elena's blood ran cold. What are you planning? She demanded. The screen shifted to a live camera feed of the Hollow Ridge clock tower. Crowds of reporters and townspeople had already gathered below, unaware they were standing at the epicenter of Voss's plan. Clue number 4, Voss said softly. The screen displayed a phrase burned into the tower's clock face. Time judges everyone. Then the broadcast ended. The growing panic. Within minutes, authorities began evacuating the town square. News helicopters hovered overhead. FBI bomb squads rushed to secure the tower perimeter. Marcus and Elena sped through barricaded streets toward the evacuation zone. As they arrived, chaos surrounded the tower. People screamed, reporters shouted, and police struggled to control crowds refusing to leave. Marcus grabbed a loudspeaker. Everyone evacuate immediately. This area is unsafe. Elena turned to the bomb squad commander. Any signs of explosives? Too early to tell, the commander replied. But if he's using the tower as a broadcast amplifier, he could be hiding transmitters or worse. Marcus studied the tower's massive clock face. It's not just a bomb threat, he said quietly. He wants an audience. The tunnel discovery. A maintenance worker approached Elena nervously. There's something you should know, he said. During the last renovation, they sealed several underground tunnels connecting the tower to old municipal buildings. Nobody's used them in years. Marcus turned sharply. Show us. The tunnels smelled of rust, damp concrete, and stale air. Flashlights bounced across graffiti-covered walls as Marcus, Elena, and tactical teams moved carefully forward. Stay alert, Marcus warned. He's used traps before. They reached a heavy steel door near the base of the tower. Fresh scratch marks lined the hinges. Elena knelt, examining the lock. It was opened recently. Marcus nodded. Stack up. The team forced the door open. Inside, they found a control room filled with broadcast equipment, wires, and dozens of broken clocks mounted across the walls. Marcus stepped forward slowly. This is his staging ground. Elena pointed at a large monitor displaying multiple live camera feeds from across town. He's watching everything. The final spiral map. At the center of the room stood a large corkboard. Marcus approached it cautiously. His breath caught. A massive spiral diagram covered the board, connecting every victim with photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes. The spiral ended at one final image. Emily Harper. Below her photograph, a handwritten message read, "Closure." Elena swallowed hard. He's planning to end it publicly. Marcus nodded. And he wants the entire world watching. The trap activates. Suddenly, alarms blared inside the tunnel. Red lights flashed across the control room as metal shutters slammed down over exits. Elena spun around. Marcus! A mechanical voice echoed through hidden speakers. Detective Hale, you're right on time. Marcus clenched his jaw. Where is she, Voss? The speakers crackled softly. You're standing beneath the stage of history. But the performance is above you. Marcus looked upward toward the tower structure towering above them. Elena, he said sharply. He's inside the clock tower. The mechanical voice returned. But before you climb, you must survive one final lesson. A digital timer appeared across the monitor screens. 6 minutes. Elena cursed under her breath. Gas lines, she said, noticing pipes running along the tunnel ceiling. Marcus grabbed his radio. All units evacuate the lower tunnels now. They sprinted toward a narrow maintenance ladder leading upward. Smoke began hissing through vents as the timer dropped rapidly. For 22. For 21. For 20. Elena climbed first, pulling Marcus behind her as thick fumes filled the corridor. They burst through the maintenance hatch into daylight seconds before the underground chamber exploded beneath the tower, shaking the entire square. Marcus rolled across the pavement, coughing violently as sirens screamed around him. Elena grabbed his shoulder. He's forcing us upward, she said. Marcus stared at the towering clock structure above them. And we're running out of time. The kidnappers' countdown. High above them, inside the hollow interior of the clock tower, Elias Voss adjusted the chains binding Emily to the chair. Broken clocks ticked along the walls, each one displaying the year of a victim's disappearance. He stepped toward a camera mounted directly in front of her. The countdown behind her displayed 9 hours and 12 minutes. History is ready, he whispered softly. Emily sobbed quietly, her voice barely audible. Please, just let me go. Voss tilted his head, staring at her with chilling calm. I'm giving you something better than freedom, he said. I'm giving you permanence. The realization. Marcus stood below the tower, staring upward as FBI snipers positioned themselves across rooftops. Elena joined him, breath still uneven from the explosion. What's our move? She asked. Marcus looked at the clock hands slowly ticking above them. He's planning to broadcast her execution when the clock strikes midnight. Elena felt her pulse spike. That gives us. Marcus checked the countdown. Less than 10 hours. He turned toward the tower entrance. And this time, we go straight to the top. The tower rose from the barren hillside like a scar carved into the earth itself. Detective Mara Ellison stood at the edge of the cracked asphalt road, staring through the early morning fog as the structure slowly revealed itself. It was taller than she expected. 16 stories of decaying concrete and shattered glass that reflected nothing but gray sky. The abandoned telecommunications tower had once been a beacon of progress for Hollow Ridge. Now it felt like a monument to everything that town had lost. Beside her, Detective Jonah Reeves adjusted the collar of his coat, his breath forming faint clouds in the freezing air. This place has been abandoned for over 25 years, he said, glancing down at his tablet. After the landslide cut off power to the entire hillside, the company shut it down overnight. No guards, no maintenance, just left it here to rot. Mara nodded slowly, but her focus never left the tower. And somehow, she said quietly, our killer turned it into his throne. Jonah swallowed. The last clue, the charred metal plate found at the murder scene 2 nights earlier, had contained etched coordinates. When they ran the numbers, they led directly to this location. More disturbing was the symbol carved into the metal. The now infamous spiral, but this time, it had been surrounded by 12 small tick marks, resembling a clock face. The message had been clear. Time was running out. The approach. The wind howled across the open hillside as they climbed the broken pathway toward the tower entrance. Rusted satellite dishes hung off the sides like skeletal remains, swaying and groaning with every gust. Mara noticed the silence first. No birds. No insects. Nothing. Feels wrong, Jonah muttered. Because it is, Mara replied. Halfway to the entrance, she suddenly stopped. What? Jonah asked. She crouched near the cracked pavement, brushing aside loose gravel. Underneath, barely visible, was a thin red wire stretching across the walkway. Tripwire, she said. Jonah's face tightened. You think it's live? Mara traced the wire with her flashlight beam. It disappeared into the rubble beside the entrance stairs. Only one way to find out, she said. Jonah carefully retrieved a small inspection mirror from his kit and angled it beneath the step. His breath hitched. There's a pressure detonator, he whispered. Old school but effective. If we'd taken one more step. Mara cut the wire with surgical precision. Then we'd be scattered across this hillside. They exchanged a glance that carried more weight than words. The killer wasn't just leaving clues anymore. He was setting traps. Inside the tower, the heavy steel doors groaned as they pushed them open. Darkness swallowed them instantly, the stale air thick with dust and the faint smell of mold. Mara flicked on her flashlight. The beam revealed a massive lobby filled with broken equipment and collapsed ceiling panels. Old monitors hung from the walls like empty eyes, their screens long dead. Graffiti covered every surface, but one image stood out immediately. The spiral. It had been painted in black across the far wall, nearly 15 feet tall. Beneath it, written in dripping red paint, were 3 words. Judgment begins here. Jonah exhaled slowly. He wants us to climb. Mara's gaze shifted toward the elevator shaft. The doors were stuck open, revealing nothing but darkness and dangling cables. Stairs it is, she said. The first floor trial. The stairwell smelled of rust and decay. Each step echoed loudly, the metal structure amplifying every movement they made. They reached the second floor landing when Mara noticed something strange. The door was slightly open. She raised her hand, signaling Jonah to stop. Slowly, she nudged the door wider. Inside, the entire floor had been cleared of debris. In the center of the room stood a single wooden chair beneath a hanging light bulb powered by a portable generator. And tied to the chair was a mannequin. Its head had been replaced with an old television set. Static flickered across the screen as they entered. Suddenly, the screen crackled to life. A distorted voice filled the room. Detectives Ellison and Reeves, welcome. Jonah's grip tightened on his weapon. You've chased shadows long enough, the voice continued. Now you climb toward truth. Each floor reveals a piece of the story you failed to see. Mara stepped closer, her expression hardening. You murdered innocent people to play games, she said. This ends today. The voice chuckled. Innocent? It asked. Is that what you believe? The television flickered, and a grainy image appeared. It showed a decades-old photograph of Hollow Ridge's town council from 1994. Mara recognized several faces immediately. Former Mayor Leonard Hayes, Police Chief Arthur Bellamy, and multiple influential community leaders. Then, red X marks appeared over each face. Every one of them had been connected to unsolved disappearances during the early 90s. Jonah stared at the screen. This can't be coincidence. Climb, the voice whispered before the screen went black. The files. On the far side of the room, Mara discovered a metal filing cabinet. Inside were dozens of folders, each labeled with a date and a name. She flipped one open. Missing persons reports. Every file had one thing in common. They had all been closed within 48 hours by order of Police Chief Bellamy. Jonah leaned over her shoulder, reading silently. Someone buried these cases, he said. Not someone, Mara corrected. An entire system. She grabbed several files and stuffed them into her evidence bag. We're taking these. The climb continues. Each floor told another part of the story. The third floor contained newspaper clippings describing a mysterious industrial accident that had killed 6 workers at Hollow Ridge Quarry. Hidden behind one clipping was a handwritten note. Not an accident. The 5th floor displayed photographs of town officials attending private meetings inside the quarry tunnels. The 7th floor was the worst. It held personal belongings, watches, children's toys, jewelry, all carefully arranged in a massive spiral across the floor. Mara's chest tightened as she recognized one of the items. A silver bracelet belonging to a missing girl from her first case as a rookie detective. She was 8 years old, Mara whispered. Jonah rested a hand on her shoulder, but she barely noticed. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The victims weren't random. They had been silenced. The elevator trap. By the 10th floor, exhaustion began to creep in. The stairwell had grown narrower, and sections of the railing had completely collapsed. When they reached the 12th floor landing, they found something unexpected. The elevator was operational. Its doors stood open, glowing faintly with working lights. Jonah frowned. That's not suspicious at all. Mara examined the control panel. The buttons were intact, but only one floor number was illuminated. 16. The top, she said. Jonah hesitated. Or a death trap. Mara studied the cables above the elevator shaft. They looked newly reinforced. He wants us up there, she said. That doesn't mean we give him what he wants. Mara met Jonah's gaze. We've come too far. After a long pause, Jonah sighed. Ladies first? She smirked faintly. Not a chance. They stepped inside together. The doors slid shut with a metallic slam. The ascent. The elevator creaked violently as it climbed. Sparks occasionally flickered from the control panel, and the lights flickered with every floor they passed. Then, halfway between the 14th and 15th floors, the elevator jerked to a sudden halt. The lights went out. Jonah cursed under his breath. A faint mechanical clicking sound echoed above them. Mara's eyes widened. Jonah, he cut the power. Before he could respond, the emergency lights flickered on, bathing the elevator in a dim red glow. Then the speaker crackled. "You've learned so much," the voice said calmly. "But knowledge without consequence is meaningless." Jonah slammed his fist against the panel. "Show yourself." "In time," the voice replied. "But first, one final judgment." Suddenly, the elevator lurched downward. Jonah grabbed the railing as Mara slammed the emergency brake lever. The cables screamed as the car dropped several feet before grinding to a violent stop. Dust rained from the ceiling. Mara's hands trembled as she held the lever in place. "We're not dying in a box," Jonah muttered, breathing heavily. The speaker crackled again. "Very well," the voice said. "You may proceed." With a deafening groan, the elevator resumed its climb. The summit. The doors opened onto the 16th floor, the tower's observation deck. Cold wind blasted into the elevator as they stepped out. The entire floor was open air, surrounded by shattered windows that overlooked the entire Hollow Ridge Valley. And standing at the center was a figure. Tall, still, wearing a dark coat that whipped violently in the wind. Mara slowly raised her weapon. "Don't move." The figure turned slightly, revealing a pale face partially hidden beneath a hood. "You've done well, Detective Ellison," he said softly. His voice matched the recordings perfectly. Jonah stepped beside Mara. "Game's over." The man smiled faintly. "Oh, it's only beginning." Behind him, a massive steel structure had been erected, a twisted sculpture shaped like the spiral symbol, built entirely from rusted metal fragments and personal belongings of the victims. At its center was a timer, counting down. 9:58. Mara's pulse spiked. "What is that?" The man spread his arms toward the valley below. "The truth," he said. "And when that clock reaches 0, the entire town will finally see it." Jonah stepped forward. "You're insane." The man tilted his head. "No," he said calmly. "I am justice." The timer ticked down. 9:41. Mara's mind raced. "What did you plant?" The man's smile widened. "You'll have to stop it to find out." Then he stepped backward and disappeared over the edge of the tower. Jonah sprinted forward, reaching the broken railing just in time to see the man vanish into the dense fog below. No impact. No sound. Just emptiness. Behind them, the timer continued to tick. 9:10. Mara turned toward the spiral structure, her heart pounding. "Jonah," she said urgently, "we need to figure out what that thing is connected to now." The wind howled around them as the countdown continued. 8:57. And far below, in the silent streets of Hollow Ridge, something began to move. The timer glowed like a heartbeat in the cold wind. 8:42. 8:41. 8:40. Detective Mara Ellison dropped to her knees beside the twisted spiral structure, her gloved hands scanning the welded metal fragments for wiring or triggers. The sculpture towered over her, nearly 8 feet tall, constructed from rusted steel beams, broken jewelry, children's toys, and personal artifacts stolen from victims spanning 3 decades. Every piece told a story. Every piece screamed accusation. "Find anything?" Jonah Reeves shouted over the roaring wind as he scanned the perimeter of the observation deck. Mara shook her head, frustration tightening her chest. "It's not just a bomb," she said. "It's wired into something bigger." The timer dropped to 7:58. Jonah crouched beside her, pulling out a compact scanning device from his field kit. The screen flickered as it searched for signal transmissions or explosive compounds. Then it beeped sharply. "I've got a signal," he said. Mara leaned closer. "It's not local," Jonah continued, eyes narrowing as data streamed across the screen. "It's broadcasting to multiple receivers across town." Mara's stomach dropped. "How many?" Jonah swallowed. "At least 12. The spiral network." Mara grabbed her radio immediately. "Dispatch, this is Detective Ellison. I need every available unit scanning for explosive or electronic signals tied to these coordinates." Static crackled. Then the dispatcher's voice came through, strained and confused. "Detective, we're already getting reports." Mara's pulse quickened. "Reports of what?" "Power fluctuations across Hollow Ridge. Streetlights are malfunctioning. Cell towers are dropping service. And there's something else." "Say it," Mara demanded. "There are metallic structures appearing around town," the dispatcher said hesitantly. "People are calling them sculptures." Jonah cursed under his breath. Mara's mind raced as realization crashed over her. "The architect didn't build one spiral," she said quietly. "He built 12. The timer dropped to 7:01. The hidden map. Mara scanned the sculpture again, forcing herself to focus. She noticed something she had missed before: thin etched lines carved into the metal fragments, connecting the victim artifacts in a precise pattern. "Jonah, look at this." He leaned closer as she traced the lines with her flashlight beam. "It's a map," he said slowly. The lines formed a perfect topographical layout of Hollow Ridge, and each victim artifact marked a location. Mara quickly photographed the structure, feeding the images into her tablet. Within seconds, she overlaid the markings onto the town's satellite map. 12 red dots blinked across Hollow Ridge. Her breath caught. "They're positioned around key landmarks," she said. "Town Hall, the old quarry, the elementary school, the hospital, the courthouse." Jonah's face paled. "He's targeting the entire town infrastructure." The timer fell to 6:12. Descent into panic. Sirens began echoing faintly from the valley below as emergency units scrambled toward unknown threats. From the observation deck, Mara could see tiny flashes of red and blue lights weaving through Hollow Ridge's narrow streets. Jonah grabbed his phone, dialing frantically. "Sheriff Dalton, listen carefully," he said the moment the call connected. "You need to evacuate every major public building immediately." Dalton's voice exploded through the speaker. "Evacuate what? Half the town is already flooding the streets because power's failing everywhere." "What the hell is going on up there?" Mara leaned into the call. "The killer planted 12 devices around Hollow Ridge," she said. "We don't know what they're wired to yet, but they're connected to a master trigger here at the tower." There was a long pause. Then Dalton spoke again, quieter this time. 12 locations? "Yes," Mara confirmed. Dalton exhaled slowly. "Those aren't random buildings," he said. "Those are the same places tied to the quarry expansion project back in 1993. Mara froze. "The industrial project that collapsed?" she asked. "Collapsed officially," Dalton said grimly. "But rumors always said the town covered something up." The timer reached 5:09. The buried past. Mara's mind flashed back to the files they had discovered earlier. Missing persons cases abruptly closed, all tied to former police chief Bellamy and town officials. "Jonah," she said, turning to him, "what if the quarry project wasn't about mining?" He stared at her, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You think they used it to hide bodies? Or something worse?" The wind intensified, howling through broken windows as if the tower itself was warning them. Jonah pulled up historical land records on his tablet, scrolling rapidly through decades-old zoning changes. Then he stopped. "Oh my God," he whispered. "What?" Mara demanded. The quarry expansion project overlapped with multiple underground tunnel systems beneath Hollow Ridge. Officially, they were sealed after the landslide, but the blueprints show several sections were never properly closed. Mara's voice turned ice cold. "Mass graves." Jonah nodded slowly. "And if the architect knows where those tunnels led." The timer dropped to 4:02. The broadcast. Suddenly, every screen on Jonah's tablet flickered black. Then a live video feed appeared. The architect's hooded face filled the display. "Citizens of Hollow Ridge." His voice echoed through emergency broadcast channels across the entire town. "For decades, your leaders buried truth beneath your streets. Tonight, you will witness what they hid." Behind him, Mara recognized the interior of the quarry tunnels, rows of collapsed support beams and partially exposed earth walls. And protruding from the dirt were skeletal remains. Jonah's jaw clenched. "He's live-streaming mass graves," he whispered. The architect continued calmly. "When the timer reaches 0, the spiral network will collapse the sealed tunnel system beneath Hollow Ridge. The earth will open, and the dead will rise into daylight." Mara's heart pounded violently. "He's going to trigger a controlled cave-in," she said. Expose the graves by destroying the tunnel ceilings. Jonah stared at the timer. 3:11. But that could take half the town with it, he said. The moral trap. The architect's voice softened on the broadcast. You have one chance, detectives, he said. Deactivate the master trigger, and the tunnels remain sealed forever, along with the truth. Or let the clock run out, and justice will surface. The video feed ended abruptly. Silence fell across the tower observation deck, broken only by the relentless ticking timer. 2:38. Jonah looked at Mara, conflict tearing across his face. If those tunnels collapse, he said, hundreds of people could die. And if they stay sealed, Mara replied quietly, dozens of murdered victims remain buried forever. The weight of the decision pressed down on them, like the collapsing tunnels themselves. 2:04. Jonah ran a hand through his hair. There has to be another way. Mara stared at the spiral sculpture again, forcing her mind to slow, to think, to analyze. The architect was obsessed with symbolism, patterns, balance, and then she saw it. Jonah, this isn't just a detonator, she said suddenly. It's a sequence trigger. What do you mean? She pointed to the 12 artifact markers embedded in the sculpture. They correspond to the 12 town locations. If we interrupt the signal chain between them, we might stop the collapse without destroying the evidence. Jonah's eyes widened. Disable the network instead of the master trigger. Mara nodded. But we'd have to shut down at least 6 of the relay points before the timer ends. Jonah glanced at the clock. 1:19. That's impossible, he said. Mara grabbed her radio again. Not if we don't do it alone. Rallying Hollow Ridge. Dispatch, Mara shouted. Listen carefully. I'm transmitting 12 coordinates. I need officers, firefighters, and any available technical teams at each location immediately. You are looking for spiral-shaped metal structures connected to underground wiring systems. You must sever the wiring manually. The dispatcher hesitated. Detective, those structures are unstable. Some are already sparking. Civilians are crowding around them. Then clear them out, Mara said sharply. And move fast. Jonah began sending digital override instructions to each responding unit, guiding them through basic wiring disruption protocols. The timer fell to 0:58. From the valley below, Mara could see emergency vehicles scattering toward different points across Hollow Ridge like ants scrambling across a dying colony. Her radio erupted with voices. Unit 3 at Town Hall, structure located. Fire department at elementary school, attempting access. Medical center team on site, wiring confirmed. Jonah clenched his fists as he monitored incoming signals. One relay down, he said as the sculpture's metal framework sparked faintly. 0:43. 2 down. 0:37. The spiral structure began emitting a high-pitched hum, vibrating violently as signals dropped from the network. 0:29. Mara held her breath. 3 down 4. 0:21. Static filled the radio as field teams struggled against unstable structures and failing power grids. 5 down, Jonah shouted. The timer dropped to 0:12. They needed one more. Just one. Suddenly, the radio burst alive with Sheriff Dalton's voice. This is Dalton. We've reached the quarry entrance relay. Structure is heavily shielded. We're cutting through now. 0:07. Metal screeched faintly through the radio. 0:05. Jonah squeezed his eyes shut. Come on. 0:03. A deafening electrical pop echoed through the sculpture. The timer froze. 0:02. Then, the spiral structure collapsed inward with a shower of sparks, its wiring system frying in a cascade of molten metal. The wind roared louder through the broken observation deck as the hum faded into silence. Jonah exhaled shakily. It's over, he whispered. But Mara wasn't celebrating. She stared toward the fog-covered valley where the architect had vanished. No, she said quietly. He wanted this. Jonah frowned. What do you mean? Mara looked back at the destroyed sculpture. He forced the town to uncover the graves without collapsing the tunnels. Now the evidence still exists, and the conspiracy can't stay buried. Below them, sirens multiplied as law enforcement began securing the quarry site where skeletal remains were already being uncovered. Hollow Ridge's darkest secret was surfacing, and somewhere in the fog, the architect was still watching, The fog over Hollow Ridge lingered like a guilty conscience. By sunrise, emergency crews had sealed off the old quarry, surrounding it with floodlights, forensic tents, and armed officers. News vans crowded the narrow access road, their satellite dishes pointing skyward like vultures circling a carcass. The town had awakened to sirens, whispers, and a truth no one could ignore anymore. Bodies had been found. Dozens of them. Detective Mara Ellison stood at the edge of the quarry entrance, watching forensic teams carefully extract skeletal remains from collapsed tunnel shafts. Each set of bones was tagged, photographed, and treated with a reverence that felt almost sacred. For years, these people had been erased. Now they were finally being seen. Jonah Reeves approached her, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. His face was pale, exhaustion carved into his features. "You should drink something," he said, handing her one. Mara accepted it, but didn't sip. "How many confirmed remains so far?" she asked quietly. Jonah hesitated. 32, he said, "and they've barely cleared the first tunnel chamber." Mara closed her eyes briefly. 32 lives buried beneath the town that had promised safety. The evidence speaks. Inside the temporary forensic command tent, monitors displayed live scans of the tunnel system. Ground-penetrating radar revealed multiple collapsed chambers branching beneath Hollow Ridge like roots of a poisoned tree. Sarah Kim, the lead forensic anthropologist flown in overnight, stood beside a digital reconstruction of the underground network. "These tunnels weren't natural cave-ins," she explained. "They were deliberately sealed." Mara stepped closer. "You're certain?" Sarah nodded. Support beams were cut cleanly. Explosive residue traces show controlled detonations at specific choke points. Whoever sealed these tunnels wanted to trap everything inside permanently. Jonah leaned against the table. "Everything, including witnesses," he said grimly. Sarah tapped her tablet again, bringing up victim identification estimates. "Many of these remains date back to the early 1990s, she said. "That lines up exactly with the quarry expansion project and the wave of missing persons reports that were quietly closed." Mara's mind spun. "Bellamy," she said. "Former police chief Harold Bellamy. The man whose name appeared repeatedly in the missing persons files they had uncovered." Jonah nodded slowly. "He was in charge when the quarry project happened," he said, "and he personally signed off on several missing persons case closures." Mara folded her arms tightly. "Bellamy died 10 years ago," she said, "which means the architect isn't him." Jonah exhaled slowly. "No," he said, "but he might have been trained by him." The forgotten witness. Sheriff Dalton entered the tent, his face drawn and sleepless. "You need to see something," he said. He handed Mara a faded personnel file pulled from town archives. The edges were yellowed with age, the ink barely legible. Mara flipped it open. The name inside made her freeze. Dr. Elias Granger, town psychologist, Hollow Ridge Rehabilitation Program, 1991 to 1998. Jonah frowned. "Rehabilitation program?" Dalton nodded. "Officially, it was a therapy initiative for families displaced by the quarry project," he said. "Unofficially, rumors say Granger was brought in to counsel witnesses who saw things they weren't supposed to." Mara scanned the file further. Granger had worked closely with Chief Bellamy, often accompanying officers during family interviews after disappearances. "He was cleaning up psychological fallout," Mara said. Dalton's jaw tightened. "Granger disappeared in 1998, he added quietly. "No record of relocation. No death certificate. Just gone." Jonah looked between them slowly. "You think he became the architect?" Mara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she flipped to the final page of the file, where a staff photograph was clipped. A tall, thin man stared out from the image, wearing a polite, academic smile behind round glasses. His posture was calm, almost detached. Mara's pulse quickened. She had seen that posture before, in surveillance footage, in the live broadcasts. "The architect studies human behavior," she said quietly. "He builds moral traps, forces people to confront buried guilt. That's psychological warfare, not just revenge." Jonah's voice dropped to a whisper. Granger specialized in trauma conditioning therapy. Mara closed the file slowly. "Which means he didn't just witness the town's secret," she said. "He studied it, perfected it, and turned it into a weapon." The hidden patient records. Jonah rushed back to the digital archive database, typing furiously as he searched for Granger's therapy case logs. Most of the files had been destroyed decades ago, but one encrypted folder remained buried deep within a corrupted server backup. After several tense minutes, Jonah broke through the firewall. "Got something," he said. Mara leaned over his shoulder as therapy transcripts filled the screen. Most patient names were redacted, but the notes were chilling. Subject expresses fear of quarry workers. Subject witnessed unauthorized excavation after curfew. Subject reports seeing bodies removed from site. Subject later reported missing. Mara felt her stomach twist. "These weren't therapy notes," she said. "They were surveillance reports." Jonah scrolled further. Then he froze. "Oh no! What?" Mara demanded. Jonah pointed to the final patient record. The name wasn't redacted. Patient Daniel Granger. Mara blinked. "His son?" she asked. Jonah nodded slowly, scrolling into the session transcripts. Patient displays severe trauma after witnessing father and town officials arguing at quarry site. Patient claims Chief Bellamy threatened family safety. Patient reported missing 2 weeks later. Mara's breath caught. "Daniel disappeared?" Jonah nodded. "According to this file, yes." A cold realization spread through Mara's chest. "What if Daniel didn't disappear?" she said. Jonah looked at her. "What if he survived and became the architect, connecting the past?" Dalton leaned against the table, absorbing the theory slowly. "You're suggesting the architect isn't Elias Granger," he said carefully. "It's his son." Mara nodded. "Raised inside the conspiracy, traumatized by it, watching victims vanish, watching his father help silence witnesses." Jonah's voice was grim. That kind of upbringing could fracture someone's mind completely. Mara stared at the patient notes again. "Or sharpen it," she said quietly. "Daniel would have known every secret, every tunnel, every official involved. He would have grown up studying how corruption operates." Dalton crossed his arms. "And eventually, he decided to expose it." "Not expose," Mara corrected. "Punish." The personal motive. Jonah pulled up missing persons timelines, overlaying them with therapy case closures and quarry expansion phases. A clear pattern emerged. Every disappearance connected to someone who had either a witnessed quarry activity, threatened to report Bellamy, or refused psychological rehabilitation. Jonah swallowed hard. "The spiral murders weren't random victims," he said. "They were generational accountability targets," Mara replied. Dalton frowned. "What does that mean?" Mara pointed to the screen. "The architect wasn't just targeting people involved in the conspiracy," she explained. "He targeted their descendants, forcing the town to confront inherited guilt." Dalton shook his head slowly. "That's twisted." "Yes," Mara said softly, "but it's also deeply personal." The final confirmation. A forensic officer rushed into the tent, breathless. "Detective Ellison, you need to come to Tunnel Chamber 3. Minutes later, Mara, Jonah, and Dalton stood inside the partially excavated quarry tunnel. Floodlights illuminated a newly uncovered skeleton positioned differently from the others. This body hadn't been dumped. It had been buried carefully, wrapped in a decayed blanket, and clutched in its skeletal hand was a small metal locket. Sarah approached carefully, holding the artifact inside an evidence bag. "We believe this victim died approximately 25 years ago," she said. "But the burial suggests someone tried to preserve the remains, not hide them." Mara stared at the locket. "Can we open it?" she asked. Sarah nodded and carefully unclasped it. Inside were 2 faded photographs. One showed Dr. Elias Granger smiling beside a young boy. The second photo showed the same boy, standing alone. And scratched into the metal beneath the image were 2 words. "Forgive me." Mara felt her throat tighten. "This was Daniel's father," she whispered. Jonah nodded slowly. "Elias Granger knew what the town was doing," he said. "And he couldn't stop it, or didn't." Mara stared at the grave. "Daniel watched his father die inside this conspiracy," she said. "And now he's making Hollow Ridge experience that same helplessness." The realization. As they exited the tunnel, Mara's radio crackled suddenly. "Detective, we've received a new transmission," Dispatch said urgently. "It's a video feed. The architect again." Mara grabbed her tablet as the screen flickered to life. The architect stood inside what appeared to be an abandoned clock tower overlooking Hollow Ridge. Massive gears rotated slowly behind him, casting rhythmic shadows across his hooded figure. "Detective Ellison," he said calmly. "You are close now. Closer than anyone has ever been." Mara stepped forward instinctively. "You're Daniel Granger," she said firmly. Silence filled the feed. Then the architect tilted his head slightly. "Names are irrelevant," he replied softly. "But yes, I am the last witness Hollow Ridge tried to erase." Jonah's breath caught beside her. Mara's voice hardened. "You murdered innocent people to avenge your past." "I exposed inherited corruption," Daniel said calmly. "Your town built its prosperity on mass graves. I simply forced it to look beneath its foundation." Mara clenched her fists. "This ends tonight," she said. Daniel's hood shifted slightly as he stepped closer to the camera. "Yes," he said quietly. "It does." Behind him, massive clock gears began accelerating, their grinding echoes reverberating through the tower. "The final judgment approaches," he continued. "And this time, detective, the entire town will stand trial." The feed cut to black. Jonah turned to Mara, dread filling his eyes. "What does he mean by final judgment?" Mara stared at the frozen screen, her instincts screaming. "It means he's planning something bigger than the tunnels," she said. "Much bigger." Outside, Hollow Ridge's clock tower bells suddenly rang. Not once, not twice, but 12 times in rapid succession. The clock tower bells echoed across Hollow Ridge like a death knell. 12 violent chimes rang in rapid succession, their metallic thunder rolling through the streets and rattling windows across town. Residents stepped outside their homes, confused and terrified. The bells had not rung in decades, not since the tower's mechanisms were declared unsafe and sealed after the quarry collapse. Detective Mara Ellison was already running toward her car. "Jonah, move!" she shouted. Jonah Reeves slammed the passenger door as Mara floored the accelerator. The tires screamed against the pavement as they sped down the winding mountain road toward town center. Police sirens howled behind them as Sheriff Dalton and several units joined the convoy. "What do you think he's building in that tower?" Jonah asked, gripping the dashboard. Mara didn't answer immediately. Her mind replayed Daniel Granger's broadcast, the rotating gears behind him, the phrase he had used. "Final judgment." "He's obsessed with symbolism," she finally said. "The clock tower represents time, accountability, consequences catching up." Jonah swallowed. "You think it's another explosive device?" "No," Mara said grimly. "Something worse. The tower awakens." By the time they reached Hollow Ridge's central square, chaos had already erupted. Hundreds of residents stood in the streets staring upward. The ancient clock tower loomed above them, its rusted hands spinning slowly backward, grinding against gears that hadn't moved in 30 years. Emergency crews struggled to clear civilians from the plaza as police barricades went up. Sheriff Dalton rushed toward Mara the moment she stepped out of the car. "We've sealed off the lower floors," he said, breathless. "But something inside the tower is generating electromagnetic interference. Radios keep cutting out. Elevators are dead. Stairwell access is unstable." Mara glanced upward at the tower's fractured stone exterior. Several windows glowed faintly from within, light flickering like a heartbeat behind the glass. "He's powering something massive," she said. Jonah checked his scanner device again. "I'm detecting multiple signal relays and underground wiring leading outward from the tower." Mara's pulse quickened. Outward to where? Jonah's face paled as he traced the network on his screen. "To every building constructed during the quarry expansion project." Dalton cursed. "That's half the town." Inside the mechanism, Mara didn't wait for backup. She pushed through the barricade and sprinted toward the tower entrance. Jonah followed close behind while Dalton shouted for tactical units to prepare. The tower doors hung partially open, rusted hinges creaking as Mara shoved them wider. Dust swirled through the dark interior, illuminated by flickering emergency lights strung along the spiral staircase. The air smelled like burned copper and ancient wood rot. As they climbed, the sound of grinding gears grew louder, metal scraping against metal in a relentless mechanical heartbeat. "Whatever he built," Jonah said between breaths, "it's integrated into the original clock mechanism." Mara nodded grimly. Daniel wasn't just using the tower as a stage. He was turning it into a machine. The spiral engine. They reached the main clock chamber 5 floors above ground level. Mara froze the moment she stepped inside. The entire room had been transformed. Massive steel arms extended from the central clock shaft, forming a rotating spiral structure that connected to dozens of cable conduits running through the walls and floor. Industrial generators hummed violently, feeding electricity into the ancient gears. At the center stood Daniel Granger. His hood was lowered now, revealing a gaunt face framed by dark hair streaked with gray. His eyes were calm, calculating, yet haunted by something deeper than rage. "You made it," he said softly without turning. Mara stepped forward, gun lowered but ready. "End this, Daniel," she said firmly. He smiled faintly as the gears rotated behind him. "It already began, Detective. The real plan." Jonah stepped toward one of the generator consoles, scanning rapidly. "Mara, this isn't a bomb," he whispered. She kept her eyes locked on Daniel. "Then what is it?" Daniel turned slowly, gesturing toward the rotating spiral engine. "This is a resonance mechanism," he said calmly. "It's designed to destabilize the abandoned quarry tunnels beneath Hollow Ridge through controlled seismic vibration." Mara's blood ran cold. "You're going to collapse the entire underground system." "Yes," Daniel said, "but not randomly. The tunnels beneath government buildings, police archives, and courthouse vaults will collapse first." Dalton's voice crackled through Mara's radio as tactical units reached the tower base. "What's he trying to do?" Dalton shouted. Mara answered without looking away from Daniel. "He's destroying the physical evidence that allowed the conspiracy to exist, and forcing buried mass graves to surface across the town simultaneously." Dalton cursed loudly. "That'll destroy infrastructure everywhere." Daniel tilted his head slightly. "Truth is rarely convenient," he said calmly. "The emotional confrontation." Mara lowered her weapon slightly. "You're not exposing truth," she said. "You're risking innocent lives again." Daniel's expression tightened for the first time. "Innocent?" he repeated quietly. He walked toward the spiral engine, touching one of the rotating beams gently. "I was 10 years old when I watched my father beg Chief Bellamy to stop the quarry excavations," he said. "He knew bodies were being hidden. He tried to report it. They threatened to kill me instead." Mara's chest tightened. "My father tried to protect me," Daniel continued. "He buried evidence, preserved remains, hoping one day someone would uncover them. But the town silenced him, forced him into complicity." Jonah's voice softened. "And you think destroying the town fixes that?" Daniel's gaze hardened. "I think forcing Hollow Ridge to confront what it buried is the only justice left." The final countdown begins. Suddenly, Jonah's scanner screamed. "Mara," he shouted. "The resonance cycle just activated." The spiral engine accelerated violently. The tower trembled as gears locked into high-speed rotation, sending deep vibrations into the ground beneath them. Mara glanced at Jonah. "How long do we have?" He stared at the readout, panic creeping into his voice. 10 minutes before the tunnels begin collapsing. Below them, Hollow Ridge's streets shook faintly as residents screamed and emergency sirens erupted across town. Breaking the machine. Mara stepped closer to Daniel. "There's another way," she said quietly. "The graves are already uncovered. The conspiracy is exposed. Let the courts handle justice." Daniel shook his head slowly. "Courts bury truth under paperwork," he said. "The earth does not lie." Mara studied the machine, forcing herself to think. "Jonah, if we shut down the generators—" "They're self-sustaining now," Jonah interrupted. "We'd need to stop the main gear shaft manually." Mara's eyes snapped toward the rotating core, a massive vertical rod spinning at lethal speed through the center of the spiral engine. "That's impossible," Jonah said. Daniel's voice was calm again. "Not impossible," he said. "Just sacrificial." Mara stared at him. "You built a kill switch into your own machine," she said slowly. Daniel nodded once. "If someone jams the main shaft, the resonance cycle stops. But the backlash will destroy the tower." Silence filled the chamber as gears thundered around them. "The choice." Dalton's voice exploded through the radio. "Evacuate immediately. Structural collapse risk confirmed." Mara ignored it, staring at Daniel. "You plan to die here," she said quietly. Daniel didn't respond. Jonah grabbed Mara's arm. "We need to go. If this tower collapses, everyone inside dies." Mara's mind raced. If they left, the tunnels would collapse across Hollow Ridge. If they stayed, someone might stop it. Daniel stepped closer to the spinning shaft. "I never intended to survive this," he said calmly. "I only intended to make Hollow Ridge remember." Mara stepped in front of him suddenly. "No," she said firmly. Daniel frowned. "You don't get to decide justice through suicide," she said. "You face trial. You face accountability. That's how this ends." Jonah stared between them, stunned. The tower trembled violently as cracks spread across the chamber walls. 7 minutes remained. Mara turned to Jonah. "Find a way to slow the gear rotation," she said. Jonah swallowed hard. "I'll try, but it won't stop completely." Mara nodded. "That's enough." Daniel watched her carefully, realization dawning in his eyes. "You're planning to jam the shaft yourself," he said. Mara didn't deny it. "Hollow Ridge deserves truth," she said. "But it doesn't deserve destruction." Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. "You would sacrifice yourself for a town that buried its victims?" Mara met his gaze steadily. "I'd sacrifice myself for the victims who deserve justice without more blood." The spiral nears collapse. Jonah rushed to the control console, frantically rewiring circuits as sparks erupted around him. The gear speed slowed slightly, but the vibrations intensified. "Mara," he shouted. 3 minutes until full resonance." The tower groaned violently as stone fragments rained from the ceiling. Daniel stepped back slowly, staring at her with something that looked dangerously close to regret. "You're stronger than they ever were," he said quietly. Mara took one step toward the spinning shaft, and outside, the entire town of Hollow Ridge shook as the clock tower bells began ringing uncontrollably. The clock tower trembled like a dying giant. Stone dust rained from the cracked ceiling as the spiral engine roared at full force, its rotating arms screaming through the air with violent mechanical fury. The resonance vibrations pulsed through the floor beneath Detective Mara Ellison's boots, sending shockwaves deep into the buried quarry tunnels below Hollow Ridge. Outside, sirens wailed in overlapping chaos. Power lines sparked. Windows shattered across town as the ground trembled with unnatural rhythm. Inside the tower, time was running out. Jonah Reeves crouched beside the control console, sparks flying dangerously close to his hands as he rewired circuits with desperate precision. "I've slowed the main gear by 12%, he shouted over the thunder of grinding metal. "But it won't hold long." Mara stared at the central shaft spinning before her, a massive steel column rotating at lethal speed through the heart of the spiral engine. The vibrations rippled outward like an earthquake waiting to happen. Daniel Granger stood several feet away, watching her with a hollow, conflicted gaze. 2 minutes remained. The point of no return. "Mara, don't do this," Jonah pleaded, his voice breaking through the mechanical roar. Mara didn't turn around. "If the resonance hits peak frequency," she said steadily, "the tunnels collapse beneath half the town. You know that." Jonah slammed his wrench against the console in frustration. "There has to be another way." Daniel stepped forward slowly, his boots echoing against the vibrating steel floor. "There isn't," he said quietly. Mara glanced at him sharply. "You designed it," she said. "You would know." Daniel nodded once. "The spiral engine amplifies underground fault lines," he explained calmly. "Once it reaches full resonance, it cannot be stopped externally, only by physically halting the shaft." Jonah swallowed hard. "That backlash would destroy the entire tower." "Yes," Daniel said. Silence filled the chamber except for the deafening rhythm of the machine. The weight of justice. Mara stepped closer to the spinning shaft, feeling the heat radiating from the metal as sparks burst from overloaded gear joints. Daniel's voice softened. "You don't understand what Hollow Ridge did," he said. "My father begged them to stop burying bodies in those tunnels. He begged them to confess." Mara's eyes never left the mechanism. "And they silenced him," she said quietly. Daniel nodded. "They forced him to help conceal the evidence, or they would have killed me," he said. "He spent the rest of his life preserving victims' remains in secret, hoping one day someone would uncover the truth." Jonah's voice lowered. "And when he died, you took his mission and twisted it into revenge." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I finished what he couldn't," he said. Mara turned to face him fully. "No," she said firmly. "You replaced justice with punishment." Daniel's expression cracked, just slightly. The tower begins to fail. A deafening crack split through the chamber as a massive stone support beam fractured overhead. Dust clouds exploded across the room, while sections of the spiral framework began vibrating uncontrollably. Jonah glanced at his scanner, panic flooding his face. 90 seconds, he shouted. The underground tunnels are reaching collapse threshold. Outside, Hollow Ridge's streets buckled slightly as residents fled in terror. Emergency crews struggled to evacuate key buildings while sirens blared in relentless waves. The tower bells rang wildly, their ancient bronze bodies slamming against the metal frame like warning alarms from another century. Daniel's breaking point. Daniel stepped closer to Mara, his voice trembling for the first time. If the tunnels stay sealed, he said, the victims remain hidden forever. Hollow Ridge will bury its guilt again. Mara shook her head. The graves are already uncovered, she said. The conspiracy is exposed. The courts will prosecute everyone involved. Daniel laughed bitterly. Courts prosecute individuals, he said, not entire communities built on silence. Mara's voice softened, but her eyes remained steady. Communities don't heal through destruction, she said. They heal through truth and accountability. Daniel stared at her. The spiral engine screamed louder as the shaft accelerated dangerously. The sacrifice. 60 seconds. Mara reached for a heavy steel stabilizer rod lying beside the engine frame. It was thick, reinforced, barely large enough to jam the spinning shaft if placed perfectly. Jonah realized what she was doing. Mara and oh, he shouted, sprinting toward her. She turned, her expression calm despite the chaos. You have to get out of here, she said. Jonah grabbed her arm desperately. You don't get to decide that alone. I'm not deciding alone, she said gently. I'm choosing the only option that saves everyone. Daniel watched them silently, conflict tearing across his face. 40 seconds. Mara pulled free from Jonah's grip and stepped toward the spinning core. The heat blasted against her skin as sparks erupted violently around the shaft. 30 seconds. Jonah collapsed against the console, his voice breaking. There has to be another way, please. Daniel's final choice. Mara raised the steel rod, preparing to drive it into the rotating shaft. Then suddenly, Daniel lunged forward and grabbed her wrist. Stop, he whispered. Mara froze, stunned. Daniel's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he slowly lowered the rod from her grip. My father spent his life trying to protect innocence, he said quietly, and I turned his memory into a weapon. The tower groaned violently as fractures spread across the stone walls. 20 seconds. Daniel took the rod from her hands. Mara's voice cracked. Daniel, don't. He gave her a faint, broken smile. This spiral ends with me, he said. Before she could react, Daniel sprinted toward the central shaft. Impact! Jonah screamed as Daniel hurled the steel rod directly into the spinning core. The rod struck the shaft with a deafening metallic explosion. For a fraction of a second, time seemed to freeze. Then the entire spiral engine detonated into a storm of sparks and shredded gears. The backlash tore through the chamber like a shockwave, ripping steel arms from their mounts and sending fragments exploding outward. The clock tower shuddered violently as the resonance vibration collapsed instantly. The shaft locked. The machine died. The collapse begins. Get down! Jonah screamed. The ceiling cracked open as massive chunks of stone crashed into the chamber floor. Mara tackled Jonah behind a fallen support beam as debris rained around them. Through the dust and falling rubble, Mara caught one last glimpse of Daniel standing near the destroyed engine core. He didn't run. He didn't move. The chamber wall exploded inward, swallowing him in a cloud of collapsing stone. Escape from the tower. Jonah pulled Mara toward the stairwell as the entire structure groaned like a dying beast. We have to go, he shouted. They stumbled down the spiral staircase as sections collapsed above them. Dust choked the air while cracks raced along the tower walls like lightning. Below them, Sheriff Dalton and tactical units burst through the entrance, dragging them out just as the upper floors began crumbling inward. Outside, Hollow Ridge residents watched in horror as the ancient clock tower split down the center. With a thunderous roar, the upper chamber collapsed, sending a plume of dust and stone exploding into the sky. The tower bells rang once more, then fell silent forever. Aftermath of the collapse. Sirens wailed as rescue teams rushed toward the rubble. Emergency crews scanned the town for structural damage, while engineers confirmed the underground tunnels had stabilized. The resonance event had stopped. Hollow Ridge still stood. Mara sat on the pavement, her lungs burning as she stared at the shattered tower ruins. Jonah sat beside her, shaking. "He saved everyone," Jonah whispered. Mara didn't answer. Across the plaza, forensic teams already began searching the collapsed tower for remains. Dust drifted through the morning air like falling ash. Sheriff Dalton approached slowly. "The tunnels are stable," he said quietly. "No further collapse risk." Mara nodded faintly. Dalton hesitated before speaking again. "Did he?" Mara stared at the ruins. "Yes," she said softly. Dalton removed his hat, lowering his head in silent respect, not for the killer Daniel became, but for the broken boy he once was. The spiral ends. Hours later, rescue crews recovered a single crushed steel rod from the engine debris. It remained lodged deep within the shattered shaft. Daniel Granger was never found. Mara stood beside the rubble as forensic lights illuminated the ruins under the setting sun. The spiral of Hollow Ridge had finally collapsed. But justice still waited to be written. The ruins of Hollow Ridge's clock tower stood like a scar against the skyline. Where the ancient structure had once cast its shadow over the town square, only a jagged ring of broken stone remained. Yellow police tape fluttered in the winter wind, snapping softly against metal barricades as forensic crews continued their careful excavation of the debris. 3 weeks had passed since the collapse. 3 weeks since Daniel Granger ended the spiral, and Hollow Ridge had never been the same. The dead speak. Inside the temporary forensic headquarters set up at the quarry, Detective Mara Ellison stood beside rows of identification tables. Each table held personal artifacts recovered from the mass graves: lockets, watches, school rings, photographs preserved in mud and time. Sarah Kim approached quietly, carrying a clipboard. "We've officially identified 47 victims," she said softly. "DNA confirmations are still pending, but the number will likely increase." Mara nodded, absorbing the weight of it. 47 lives erased by silence. 47 families who would finally have answers. "Families are beginning to arrive," Sarah added. "Many of them have been waiting decades." Mara watched through the tent opening as relatives gathered outside. Some elderly, some middle-aged, some young enough to have only known the victims through stories. Grief filled the air, but so did something else. Closure. The domino effect. Sheriff Dalton entered the tent, holding a stack of legal documents thicker than a phone book. "State investigators have issued 22 arrest warrants," he said grimly. Mara turned toward him. "Former city council members, quarry contractors, retired law enforcement officers," Dalton continued. "Even 2 judges who helped bury case files in the 90s. Jonah Reeves stepped closer, scanning the list over Dalton's shoulder. "They're charging them with conspiracy, obstruction of justice, manslaughter, and unlawful disposal of human remains," he said. Dalton nodded. "The entire foundation of Hollow Ridge's leadership is collapsing." Mara folded her arms, staring at the names. "For decades, they convinced themselves they were protecting the town," she said quietly. Jonah looked toward the quarry tunnels visible beyond the tent. "They protected their reputation," he said, "not the truth. The missing architect." Despite weeks of excavation at the clock tower site, Daniel Granger's body had never been recovered. Search teams combed through tons of rubble, scanning for remains or evidence of escape. Every possibility had been examined. Every tunnel beneath the tower had been sealed or mapped. Nothing. He had vanished. Standing near the collapsed tower foundation, Mara stared at the empty space where the spiral engine had once rotated. Jonah approached beside her. "They're officially listing him as deceased," he said carefully. "Presumed killed during structural collapse." Mara didn't respond. Jonah studied her expression. "You don't believe that, do you?" he asked quietly. She exhaled slowly. "I believe Daniel Granger died the day Hollow Ridge buried those victims," she said. "What we saw in that tower was something else." Jonah nodded slowly. "A ghost built from trauma." Mara glanced toward the rubble again. "And sometimes ghosts disappear the moment they finish haunting the truth." The trials begin. By early spring, Hollow Ridge's courthouse became the epicenter of one of the largest corruption trials in state history. Media outlets flooded the town daily. Documentary crews set up outside government buildings. Survivors and victim families filled courtroom benches as decades-old conspiracies unraveled under sworn testimony. Mara sat quietly in the back row during one of the hearings as prosecutors presented newly uncovered quarry records, falsified death reports, and psychological case notes from Dr. Elias Granger's archives. One by one, former officials confessed, some out of guilt, some out of fear, all under the crushing weight of evidence that Daniel had forced into the light. Jonah leaned toward Mara as another defendant was led away in handcuffs. "He exposed them all," Jonah whispered. Mara watched the courtroom silently. "Yes," she said, "but he destroyed himself to do it." Elias Granger's legacy. Weeks later, forensic teams completed excavation of the special burial chamber discovered in the quarry, where Elias Granger had secretly preserved several victims' remains before his disappearance. A small memorial service was held at the site. Mara stood beside Sarah and Jonah as community members gathered around a newly installed monument bearing the names of every identified victim. Beneath the names, a second inscription had been added. "Truth cannot be buried forever." Sheriff Dalton stepped forward during the ceremony, his voice heavy with regret. "For years, this town chose silence over justice," he said. "Today, we begin choosing truth instead." Families lit candles one by one, placing them along the quarry's edge. Mara watched quietly, her hands buried deep inside her coat pockets. Jonah glanced at her. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded faintly. "I keep thinking about Elias Granger," she said. "He tried to preserve the truth quietly, hoping someone would uncover it without violence." Jonah followed her gaze toward the memorial, and Daniel forced it into the open. Mara's voice lowered. Two men, trying to expose the same darkness, in completely different ways. Rebuilding Hollow Ridge. Months passed. Construction crews demolished the remains of the clock tower entirely. In its place, the town council, now rebuilt under state supervision, approved construction of a public remembrance plaza. No towers, no monuments of power, just an open space with a circular stone pathway designed in a subtle spiral pattern, honoring victims rather than glorifying tragedy. Mara visited the site often during reconstruction. Each time, she felt the weight of the story settling deeper into the town's identity. Hollow Ridge would never forget again. The final file. Late one evening, Mara sat alone in her office reviewing the last case report connected to the Spiral murders. The official file labeled, "Case status closed." She flipped through hundreds of pages, crime scene photos, forensic reports, victim testimonies, Daniel's psychological profile. At the very end of the file sat a sealed envelope discovered inside the clock tower ruins weeks after the collapse. Addressed simply, to the detective who would understand. Mara stared at it for a long moment before opening it. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Detective Ellison, if you are reading this, it means the Spiral has ended, and Hollow Ridge has finally been forced to see what it buried. I know you believe justice should exist without destruction. I wanted to believe that too. But I grew up watching truth suffocate under authority, fear, and convenience. Every adult who should have protected the innocent instead protected their reputation. I did not want revenge. I wanted acknowledgement. If my father had lived in a town brave enough to confess its sins, I would never have become what you chased. I do not ask forgiveness, only understanding. Truth always finds its way to the surface. Sometimes it just needs someone willing to dig. DG. Mara lowered the letter slowly, her throat tight. Jonah stepped into her office doorway. "Is that it?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "The final piece," she said. "The Spiral ends." 6 months later, Hollow Ridge held its first annual remembrance vigil at the new plaza. Hundreds of residents gathered in silence as names of the victims were read aloud beneath candlelight. Mara stood at the edge of the crowd, watching families hold each other as the final name echoed across the square. As the vigil ended, Jonah approached her. "You know," he said, "this town might actually heal." Mara watched children running across the spiral stone walkway, their laughter echoing where sirens once screamed. "Healing isn't forgetting," she said quietly. Jonah nodded. "It's remembering and choosing to be better." Mara glanced once more toward the empty space where the clock tower had once stood. For the first time since arriving in Hollow Ridge, the town felt peaceful. The buried truth had surfaced. The spiral had broken, and justice, imperfect, painful, but real, had finally begun. Story 2. It was the kind of fog that swallowed headlights whole, turning the familiar into the unknowable. Mistwood Bridge, a crumbling relic from the early 1900s, stretched over the river like a skeletal hand. On this particular October night, it was almost deserted, except for the lone sedan moving cautiously across its slick asphalt. Inside the car, Claire Dawson gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. Her eyes darted between the dim dashboard light and the road ahead, where fog twisted in thick, gray serpents. She had been driving for hours, chasing a lead for the investigative podcast she hosted. A story that had drawn her here from Boston to the sleepy town of Mistwood, Vermont. Claire's phone buzzed. A text message, anonymous. "Stop looking. Some truths are better left buried." She frowned, a chill crawling down her spine. The fog thickened as she reached the midpoint of the bridge, the river below hidden behind a curtain of mist. Then, without warning, the sedan's engine stuttered. Click, click, click. The lights dimmed. The engine died. Claire exhaled sharply. She fumbled for her phone, but the signal was gone. Only the fog and the distant sound of water rushing beneath the bridge remained. A movement in the mist caught her eye, a shadow crossing the edge of her windshield. She leaned forward, squinting. Nothing. But then came the faint sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing over the bridge. Before she could react, a hand gripped the door handle from outside. It rattled violently. Claire's heart hammered in her chest. She tried to lock the door, but the button wouldn't respond. A whisper floated through the fog. "Claire Dawson, you shouldn't be here." Panic surged. She tried the ignition again. Nothing. The footsteps grew closer, then stopped abruptly as if whoever, or whatever, was outside had vanished. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, in a blink, the headlights of a passing car pierced the fog. The figure on the bridge was gone. Shaking, Claire restarted the engine, her pulse racing. But the moment she reached the far side of the bridge, she noticed it, a single, small object lying on the road. She stopped the car, heart in her throat. A photograph, soaked from the mist, depicting a man she didn't recognize, and behind him, the Mistwood Bridge, identical to how it looked that night. Written on the back in black ink. "Next time, it won't be a warning." Claire shivered. Something in Mistwood had been watching her. And judging by the message, the town's secrets were far from done with her. Little did she know, this was only the beginning. Claire Dawson could barely see her own hands in front of her as she pulled into the small parking lot of the Mistwood Police Department. The town's streets were shrouded in thick fog, and the only lights were the flickering neon sign above the PD and the faint glow of street lamps casting long, eerie shadows. Mistwood looked like a place frozen in time. Victorian houses, wrought iron fences, and streets so narrow a single car barely fit. But beneath that picturesque exterior, Claire could feel it. Something was very, very wrong. She stepped out of her rental car, the damp mist soaking through her coat almost immediately. The hair on the back of her neck stood on end. The text she had received the night before, "Stop looking. Some truths are better left buried," had left her shaken. She had told herself it was someone playing a prank, but after what happened on the bridge, she wasn't so sure. Inside the station, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Detective Frank Holloway, a man in his late 40s with a perpetually tired expression and a crooked tie, looked up from his paperwork. His eyes narrowed when he saw her badge and camera equipment. "You're the podcaster," he said flatly. "Claire Dawson. Heard about you. What brings you to Mistwood?" Claire tried to smile. "Investigative work. There's been a series of disappearances in the area over the past 20 years. People vanish, no one talks about it, and I dig into mysteries." Holloway let out a low chuckle that didn't reach his eyes. "You don't want to dig here. Mistwood doesn't like people poking around. And disappearing, well, that's a story we try to keep quiet." Claire raised an eyebrow. "And yet here you are, still on duty." He shrugged. "I follow orders, not legends. But even I know some things are better left buried. You'd do well to heed that warning." Before she could respond, the phone on his desk rang, cutting through the tension. Holloway picked it up, listening intently. Then his face went pale. "Claire," he said, voice tight, "you're going to want to see this. We have a body. The first discovery." Claire followed Holloway through the foggy streets, the patrol car's lights barely cutting through the thick gray mist. They drove in silence until they reached the edge of the Mistwood Woods, a dense forest known for its tangled undergrowth and ancient pine trees. The police had cordoned off a small clearing with yellow tape, and the smell of damp earth mixed with the metallic tang of blood. The body lay face down, half covered in leaves. The victim was young, a man in his late 20s, dressed in jeans and a flannel shirt. His hands were bound with rope, bruises marred his skin, and his face was obscured by the mud of the forest floor. Claire knelt beside the body, trying to keep her emotions in check. She had seen crime scenes before, but something about this one made her stomach twist. It wasn't just the violence, it was the message. The way the body had been placed, almost ceremoniously, hinted at ritual. Holloway muttered, "Found him early this morning." Hikers stumbled across the clearing. Claire's voice was barely a whisper. "Do we know who he is?" Holloway shook his head. "No ID yet. No wallet, no phone. No witnesses. But the thing is, this isn't the first time something like this has happened." Claire's heart skipped a beat. "You mean there have been others?" "Yes," Holloway said, grim. "Over the last 2 decades. People disappear. Some show up dead in the woods. Others never at all. And the strangest part, there's a pattern. Certain nights, certain foggy conditions, certain locations. Always near Mistwood Bridge or the woods nearby." Claire nodded slowly. Her instincts screamed that she was onto something much larger than a single murder. "Have you checked the old missing persons cases?" Holloway hesitated. "Some of them. But most were quietly closed or declared runaways. Nobody wanted to dig too deep." Claire frowned. "Sounds like someone wanted it buried. Or maybe someone who never wanted to be caught." Holloway looked at her sharply. "You've been reading the files, haven't you?" "I do my homework," she replied evenly. "And I've seen enough to know there's a connection. The fog, the bridge, the forest. The bodies aren't random." Holloway's eyes narrowed. "Be careful. Whoever's doing this is clever. And dangerous. A hidden clue." Claire crouched closer to the body, careful not to disturb anything. Something glinted in the mud near the victim's hand, a small silver locket. She picked it up with gloved hands and carefully opened it. Inside was a tiny photograph of a little girl, her smile wide and innocent. On the opposite side, a date was etched, October 16th, 1996. Claire's pulse quickened. That date was 24 years ago. Could it be linked to another disappearance? She had been compiling a timeline of vanishings, and suddenly the gaps began to make sense. "Detective Holloway," she said, holding up the locket. "This isn't just a murder. It's a message. Whoever did this is leaving clues, taunting us, maybe, or forcing someone to see the pattern." Holloway glanced at the locket, unease crossing his face. "That's new. We've never had anything like this before. Whoever did this, they're organized. Precise. And they're escalating." Claire nodded. "And they're still here. The town's whispered secrets." That evening, Claire decided to visit Mistwood's small library. She hoped the archives might hold old newspapers or records that hadn't yet been digitized. The librarian, an elderly woman named Ruth, eyed her warily as Claire requested files from the mid-1990s. "You're looking for the disappearances, aren't you?" Ruth said quietly, her hands shaking slightly. "Everyone in this town knows, but nobody talks. You don't want to dig, dear. Some things are better left alone." Claire leaned forward, her voice gentle but insistent. "I need to understand. Please. Someone's being murdered again. I need to know why." Ruth sighed, and after a long pause, handed over a thin, yellowed folder. Inside were newspaper clippings about missing persons, mostly teenagers and young adults who had vanished near the woods or the bridge, never to be seen again. Claire flipped through them, noting patterns. Each disappearance had occurred on nights with heavy fog. Witnesses were rare, and official reports often mentioned possible runaways or unspecified accidents. But one name caught her eye: Eleanor Hayes, a girl who had vanished in 1996, the same year etched on the locket she found earlier. "Eleanor Hayes," Claire murmured. "She's the first victim in the chain." Ruth leaned closer. "She was found later. But what you don't know is, she wasn't alone." Claire's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Ruth lowered her voice. "There's a pattern. One person disappears, and someone connected to them follows years later. It's like the town itself has a memory, or someone in it remembers, and they decide who will vanish next." Claire's stomach tightened. The fog, the bridge, the forests, they were all part of a cycle. Someone, or something, was orchestrating the disappearances, generation after generation. An unsettling encounter. As Claire left the library, night had fully fallen, and the fog had thickened into a dense, living entity. The streets were empty. Her footsteps echoed in the silence. She felt eyes on her, an unshakable sensation that someone was trailing her. She quickened her pace, only to see a figure step from the mist, a man, tall and thin, face obscured by shadows. "Claire Dawson," he said in a low, cold voice. "You shouldn't be here." Her heart hammered. "Who are you?" He didn't answer. Instead, he dropped something at her feet and vanished back into the fog before she could react. Claire bent down. It was a single page, handwritten. "The past has teeth. Bite too deep, and it will bite back. Stop looking or join them." Her hands trembled as she read the note. This wasn't random. The murders, the warnings, the disappearances, they were all connected. Claire knew with a deep, sinking certainty. She was no longer just an investigator. She had become a part of the pattern. The fog swirled around her, thick and impenetrable. Somewhere in Mistwood, a predator was watching, and now it had noticed her. Claire Dawson woke before dawn, the fog still clinging to the streets of Mistwood like a shroud. Sleep had been impossible after the events at Mistwood Bridge and the discovery of the first victim. The handwritten note left at her feet haunted her. "The past has teeth. Bite too deep, and it will bite back. Stop looking or join them." She couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or multiple someones, were watching her. Every shadow in the fog seemed alive. Every distant creak of timber or rustle of leaves sounded like a warning. Yet, despite the fear, Claire knew she couldn't turn back. If the town's secrets were to be uncovered, she had to find the source, the root of this cycle of disappearances. And she believed she had a clue, a lead in the archives. Claire returned to Mistwood Library once the sun broke weakly over the horizon, painting the foggy streets in dull gold. Ruth, the elderly librarian, regarded her with suspicion, though she did not stop Claire from taking out a folder of old maps and property records. Claire had spent hours poring over missing person files, cross-referencing dates, locations, and any overlapping patterns. One thing kept repeating. Almost every disappearance occurred within a 2-mile radius of the bridge, but a few were closer to the outskirts of town, near abandoned roads and backwoods paths. A property caught her eye, a large Victorian house, long since boarded up, hidden behind overgrown pines and vines. Its address was listed in connection with several absentee residents who vanished without explanation during the 1980s and 1990s. Claire's pulse quickened. Something about this house felt deliberate, almost like it had been waiting for her to notice. The drive to the hidden house. By mid-morning, Claire was driving down a narrow, winding road that led to the outskirts of Mistwood. The fog persisted, dense and unyielding. Her GPS struggled, the roads unnamed and twisting. When the trees finally cleared, the house appeared before her like a relic of some forgotten past. It was enormous, 3 stories, gabled roofs, and ivy crawling over weathered brick. Windows were darkened with grime, and the wooden porch sagged under decades of neglect. A wrought iron fence, rusted but intact, encircled the property, and the gate hung crooked, swinging slightly in the breeze. Claire parked a short distance away, noting that the isolation of the property would make it nearly impossible for anyone inside to be seen from the road. The perfect hiding place, or a lair. She grabbed her flashlight, camera, and small recorder and approached cautiously. Each step over the damp leaves and cracked concrete sent a muffled crunch echoing through the fog. Signs of life. The front door was reinforced with planks, but Claire could see faint scratches and dents along the wood, as if someone had been entering and exiting for years. She crouched to examine the threshold and noticed footprints in the mud leading toward a side entrance. Small, careful, deliberate. Claire's breath caught. This house wasn't abandoned. Someone or multiple people still lived here. She followed the trail around the side of the house to a partially collapsed window. Peering inside, she saw what looked like a storage room. Old furniture covered in dust, stacks of newspapers, and shelves filled with jars of preserved items. But the most disturbing sight was along the far wall, a series of photographs tacked in a meticulous grid. Victims. Claire's hands trembled as she scanned the images. Young men, women, even children, all who had disappeared over the last 4 decades. Dates were scribbled beneath each photo. Some had no names, some had initials. And then she noticed something else. In the center of the display was a recent photo, taken within the last week. Someone she didn't recognize, but the way the eyes stared from the glossy paper made her stomach turn. It was a warning. The journal. As Claire's flashlight traced the walls, something caught her eye. A small desk tucked into a corner. On it lay a leather-bound journal, thick with age. The cover bore no name, only the initials EH. Her fingers shook as she opened it. The first page was written in careful, slanted handwriting. They always forget the forgotten. The town never remembers. It's my duty to remind them. Flipping through, Claire saw entries detailing the disappearances, dates, and locations. The entries spanned decades, describing victims in chilling detail, including how they were chosen. October 16, 1996, Eleanor Hayes. She walked too close to the bridge. She is ours now. Her memory will guide the next. Her heart sank. The date matched the locket she had found at the first victim's body. This journal wasn't just a record. It was a guide, a manifesto, a blueprint for continuing disappearances. The hidden basement. At the back of the house, Claire noticed a loose floorboard. Her flashlight beam caught a small latch. Heart racing, she pried it open and found a narrow staircase leading downward. Damp, moldy air rose from below, carrying with it the faint, metallic scent of blood. She descended carefully, the stairs creaking under her weight. The basement was surprisingly large, carved from stone rather than poured concrete. Chains hung from the ceiling, and there were remnants of old beds, containers, and what looked like storage crates, some sealed, some open. Then she saw it, a small makeshift shrine. Candles burned low in the corners, and a corkboard displayed more photographs. Victims of all ages, with dates, initials, and handwritten notes like, "Next in the cycle," and "Watched waiting." Claire realized with horror that this was not just a single perpetrator. This house had been a hub for someone, or an organization, keeping decades-long control over who vanished in Mistwood. The evidence of a ritual. In the corner of the basement, she noticed a strange spiral etched into the floor, dark stains tracing a geometric pattern, overlaid with small, carved symbols. Some were numbers, some were letters, some she couldn't recognize. It looked ceremonial. Claire's voice caught in her throat. This isn't random. It's ritualistic. Her mind raced. Whoever had lived here had been following a system for decades, choosing victims according to some twisted logic. The spiral, the dates, the locket, the photographs, it was all connected. And the fog, the bridge, the woods, they weren't just scenery. They were part of a map, part of the ritual. Suddenly, a sound made her freeze, a faint shuffle, like someone moving above her on the floorboards. "Hello," Claire called, her voice steady despite the rising fear. Silence. The fog outside pressed against the basement windows like a living wall. Every instinct in Claire screamed that she wasn't alone, and hadn't been for decades. The hidden attic. Determined to uncover more, Claire returned upstairs and began checking every accessible door and staircase. One narrow stairwell led to the attic. The boards groaned under her weight, and the air smelled of dust, rot, and something faintly metallic. Inside the attic, she found stacks of old newspapers, notebooks, and maps detailing the town of Mistwood, roads, bridges, the forest paths, and notes in the margins. Do not let them see. On the far wall, she saw a map marked with red pins. Each pin corresponded to a previous disappearance. Some areas overlapped the fog's densest regions. Others were near abandoned homes or hidden forest clearings. Claire traced her finger over a pin near Mistwood Bridge, the starting point. Another pin, recent and fresh, was marked just a few blocks from the hidden house itself. Her stomach dropped. Someone had been watching her, guiding her here. A warning from the shadows. Before she could examine further, she heard the attic hatch above creak. Heavy footsteps pounded down the stairs from the upper levels. A voice, low and deliberate, cut through the air. "You shouldn't have come here, Claire Dawson." Her flashlight shook as she aimed it toward the sound. A shadow moved in the attic's doorway. The figure's features were obscured by the foggy light filtering through the roof's skylight, but the presence radiated danger. Claire's heart raced. The person, man or woman, knew she was inside. They had been expecting her. "You're digging where you don't belong," the shadow said again. "Some doors are locked for a reason." Claire swallowed, forcing herself to speak. "I'm not leaving. Not until I know the truth." A pause. Then a chuckle, low and chilling. Truth, the figure said, is a luxury you can't afford. With that, the shadow vanished into the floorboards above, leaving Claire alone in the attic with the eerie glow of the fog outside and the spiral of crimes she had only begun to understand. Her mind raced. Whoever controlled the house, whoever orchestrated the disappearances, was still active. And now, they knew she was here. Claire Dawson realized with grim clarity. The investigation had just become personal. Claire Dawson barely slept that night. The hidden house, with its basement shrine and attic maps, had lodged itself in her mind like a malignant seed. The chilling voice in the attic echoed in her ears. Truth is a luxury you can't afford. And yet, she couldn't stop thinking. She had to understand the spiral, the pattern, the cycle, the orchestration of decades of disappearances in Mistwood. Something in the house's records had hinted at it. Something bigger than a single killer. By morning, Claire was already back at the library, sifting through more archives. She had taken photographs of every map, every note, every spiral etched into the floors of the house. Every clue seemed random alone, but together they formed a rhythm, a timeline. Connecting the dots, Claire spread the materials across a large table in a quiet backroom at the library. Photographs of victims, property maps, police reports, newspaper clippings, and the spiral diagrams from the hidden house. She began overlaying timelines. The first disappearance she could confirm was Eleanor Hayes in 1996, the date etched on the locket she had found. Then, over the following years, there were disappearances every few months in the same foggy season, late October to early November, always near the bridge, the woods, or hidden paths through town. Claire marked each on a timeline. But the real shock came when she overlaid them with locations. The dots didn't just scatter randomly. They formed a spiral pattern radiating out from Mistwood Bridge. Each disappearance was deliberately positioned to expand the spiral, almost as if someone were mapping it over time. The spiral of time, she whispered, her eyes widening. It wasn't just geography, it was chronology. Each victim's disappearance followed a set cadence, calculated down to the day and location, almost like a clock ticking through the years. Whoever orchestrated this wasn't impulsive. They were meticulous, patient, and calculating. A pattern emerges. Claire noticed the locket date, Eleanor Hayes, sat at the spiral's center. Every subsequent victim expanded outward, forming a circle, then a larger circle, then yet another, always pushing the spiral further from the bridge. And then the horrifying realization hit her. The most recent victim, the one in the forest found earlier that week, was placed along the next predicted point on the spiral. She flipped through the attic maps and diagrams again. Her finger landed on the fresh red pin marking a location just outside town. "They're still planning," she murmured. "They're still following the spiral." Her recorder, left on the table, captured her whisper, echoing like a warning. If the pattern continues, there's another victim. And soon, the town's forgotten corners. Claire left the library and drove along the foggy backroads, following the mapped points on her makeshift spiral chart. Most led to abandoned homes, overgrown paths, or stretches of woods that the townspeople avoided. Every road, every house seemed steeped in history and secrets. At one stop, she noticed an abandoned school building. Windows were boarded, but the front door was slightly ajar. Inside, the air smelled of mold and decay. She scanned the floor with her flashlight and froze. Carved into the dust, a spiral, large and imperfect, but unmistakable. Around it, initials were etched in haphazard, scratched letters, the first letters of previous victims' names. Claire's pulse raced. Whoever did this was leaving breadcrumbs, messages embedded in locations, each a warning and a clue. The victim's story. Back at her temporary hotel room, Claire reviewed the police reports for the latest victim. The young man found in the forest had been a recent college graduate who moved to Mistwood for work. His apartment was neat, almost sterile, with only a few personal items. There were no signs of struggle in his living quarters, indicating he was lured elsewhere. Claire connected the dots. The spiral of time dictated not just who was taken, but how. Lured from safety into isolated locations, always chosen based on their proximity to previous victims, expanding the spiral with each new disappearance. It was calculated, ritualized, and horrifyingly precise. A journal revisited. Claire reopened the journal from the hidden house. This time, she noticed subtle hints she had overlooked before. Alongside the entries of disappearances were cryptic notations, numbers, letters, small diagrams. At first, they seemed random, but now, with the spiral pattern in mind, she realized the notation represented intervals in days and the expansion of the spiral outward. Whoever had written this journal had essentially been scripting the murders across decades like a geometric formula. It was like the killer, or killers, were following a cosmic blueprint of time itself. The threat intensifies. Claire's phone buzzed. A message. You're getting too close. Stop now, or become part of the spiral. Her hands shook. The killer had access to her number, knew her movements, and was aware she had discovered the pattern. She typed back, I'm not stopping. Someone has to end this. No reply. The fog outside pressed against her hotel window, swirling like the spiral of time itself. She realized she was no longer an observer. She was now a potential victim, the next point in the ever-expanding pattern. The spiral's origins. Claire spent the night digging through historical records of Mistwood. She discovered reports dating back to the early 1900s, disappearances that had been dismissed as runaways or accidents. Many were near Mistwood Bridge, or along now-abandoned forest trails. She realized the spiral was older than anyone had realized, decades older. The recent murders were only a continuation of a tradition, or perhaps an obsession, that had persisted across generations. A horrifying thought struck her. Whoever orchestrated this had learned patience over decades, perfecting a method that spanned lifetimes. And now, after years of dormancy, the spiral had reawakened. Preparing for the next move, Claire knew she couldn't confront this blindly. She began gathering resources, maps, files, notebooks, digital copies of every journal entry, every victim profile. She started marking likely next locations along the spiral, predicting the next point in the pattern. If she was right, the killer's next move would be imminent. And if she was wrong, she could become the next name in the spiral, the next point in the meticulously calculated cycle of disappearances. By dawn, she had constructed a plan. She would stake out the most probable location for the next victim, observe the patterns firsthand, and attempt to anticipate the killer's moves. A whisper from the past. Late that night, Claire returned to Mistwood Bridge, the fog thicker than ever. The air smelled of damp wood and decaying leaves. She stood at the midpoint, flashlight in hand, scanning the water and fog for movement. And then she heard it, a whisper, barely audible over the wind. Time always comes full circle. Claire froze. The voice was familiar, cold, measured, deliberate. Someone had been here. Someone was watching, waiting, feeding off the rhythm of the spiral. She swallowed hard and whispered back into the fog. I see you. I know the pattern. I will stop it. Silence answered her. But Claire could feel it. The spiral of time was alive, and it had acknowledged her challenge. For the first time, she knew. The investigation was no longer just about uncovering a pattern. It was about surviving it. Mistwood was waking under a gray, overcast sky when Claire Dawson returned to her makeshift command center, a small room above a shuttered cafe she had rented for the week. The town, silent and cautious, seemed almost to hold its breath, as if aware that her investigation had disturbed something long dormant. Claire spread the spiral map across the table. Red pins marked every disappearance since 1996. She had added her latest observations, locations, dates, probable next targets. Each pin was another step outward from Mistwood Bridge, tracing a circle that expanded with terrifying precision. At the center of the spiral was a singular focal point, a structure Claire had never seen, but whose existence had been hinted at in the attic journal from the hidden house, a place simply referred to as the Tower. The Tower emerges. According to Ruth, the librarian, the Tower had been part of Mistwood's forgotten history. Constructed in the early 1900s, it was originally an observation tower for a wealthy landowner. Local lore suggested the original owner, a man named Victor Harrow, had been obsessed with cycles, astronomy, and the idea of judging time. Claire's gut told her the tower was more than a relic. It was a locus of the spiral. Every generation of disappearances seemed to trace outward from this point, and every new victim had a link to the tower, either directly or through the spiral pattern. Determined, she set out that morning, driving to the forested outskirts where maps indicated the tower still stood, mostly hidden behind thick pines. The fog rolled in from the river, hugging the forest floor and turning the trees into ghostly silhouettes. When she reached the site, Claire's flashlight illuminated what remained of the tower. The structure was tall and skeletal, a rusted iron skeleton with crumbling stone at the base. Windows gaped like empty eyes, and a staircase spiraled upwards into darkness. The tower had the air of a place long abandoned, but its presence radiated intent, almost as if it were waiting for her. The entrance. Claire carefully climbed the stone steps that led to the tower's first floor. The door was partially open, creaking on rusty hinges. Inside, the smell of damp metal and decay hit her like a wall. The interior was narrow and claustrophobic. Spiral staircases wound upwards, their edges jagged from years of neglect. Faded murals on the walls depicted clocks, circles, and celestial diagrams. Each floor seemed to reflect the spiral motif she had seen in the hidden house and mapped across Mistwood, a geometric obsession carried into architecture itself. Claire's flashlight illuminated a series of small alcoves along the stairwell, each containing objects preserved in dust, old photographs, handwritten notes, and trinkets belonging to people who had vanished. Her stomach churned. This tower wasn't just symbolic. It was a repository, a shrine, a judgment hall for victims spanning generations. The spiral of judgment. As Claire ascended, she began to notice the spiral more clearly. The staircase itself was a metaphor, a physical embodiment of the pattern she had been tracing across the town. Each landing had symbols etched into the stone, dates, initials, and cryptic numbers, mirroring the diary she had studied in the hidden house. Her heart pounded. Whoever had built this, or preserved it, had orchestrated a system not only across space, but through time. The victims weren't random. They were part of a deliberate expansion, each disappearance reinforcing the spiral's geometry. And at the very top of the tower, Claire suspected, she would find the source, the one who judged, chose, and orchestrated it all. Signs of the living. At the third landing, Claire froze. Something had shifted. Dust particles stirred in the air, though the floorboards creaked beneath her weight. She could feel the presence of someone else, just beyond her line of sight. Then came the whisper. "You've climbed far enough, Claire Dawson." She spun toward the sound, but the stairwell remained empty. Her flashlight flickered, and she saw something etched into the stone wall, a symbol she recognized from the basement shrine in the hidden house. It was a spiral, the same pattern as the town's disappearances, but this one had blood streaked across it. Claire's breath caught. Whoever had made this mark was still alive, and they were daring her to continue. Evidence of the mastermind. On the fourth landing, Claire discovered a makeshift desk wedged into a corner. Papers, maps, and journals were spread out meticulously. Here, she found the tower's operational history, records that spanned decades, detailing disappearances, selection criteria, and victims' last known movements. One entry was dated just 3 days ago. Another will walk the spiral soon. Ensure the fog is thick. They must not escape. Claire realized with a cold dread that the mastermind was still active, still orchestrating the pattern. Every clue she had uncovered, the hidden house, the locket, the spiral of time, was part of a living, breathing network that operated across Mistwood. And now she was inside the very structure where it all began. The top of the tower. The final flight of stairs groaned beneath Claire's weight. The fog outside pressed against the narrow windows like a living wall. When she reached the top, the tower opened into a circular observation deck. From here, the forest stretched endlessly in all directions, the bridge a distant line through the fog. In the center of the deck stood a pedestal. On it was a diary, different from any she had seen, bound in dark leather, sealed with a wax emblem. Claire approached cautiously, fingers trembling. The diary contained meticulous instructions: how to select victims, how to expand the spiral, how to ensure that Mistwood remained oblivious while the system persisted across generations. Each entry read like a manifesto, and at the very end a name, Victor Harrow. Claire's heart raced. This wasn't just a family obsession. It had started with him over a century ago, and somehow his methods, teachings, and obsession had been preserved, passed down through hidden houses, rituals, and structures like the tower. The shadow revealed. Suddenly, the fog outside thickened unnaturally. Claire's flashlight flickered. And then she saw him, a figure standing at the far edge of the deck, obscured by shadow. "You've done well to climb," the man said, voice low, measured. "But some truths are not yours to carry." Claire's mind raced. This was the living architect of the spiral, the one who had orchestrated disappearances, maintained the tower, and ensured the spiral of time continued uninterrupted. "I know what you've done," Claire said, voice steady despite the fear. "All the disappearances, the spiral, the hidden houses. I know your pattern, and I will stop it." The man laughed softly, almost pleasantly, but the sound was cold, calculated. "Stop it?" he repeated. "You misunderstand. You can't stop the spiral. It is larger than you, larger than this town, larger than time itself." Claire clenched her fists. She had traced the spiral, found the houses, predicted the next victim. She was close, so close to dismantling the pattern. The man's gaze swept the forest below. "You've seen the tower, Claire. You've seen the spiral. But do you understand what it takes to maintain it? What it takes to preserve the order of generations?" Claire stepped forward, fearless. "It doesn't take murder. It doesn't take fear. It only takes courage, and the truth. I have both." The figure paused. Then, without another word, he vanished into the fog, leaving Claire alone at the top of the tower. The realization. Claire sank to the pedestal, heart racing. She realized that the spiral wasn't just a series of killings. It was a philosophy, an obsession passed down through generations, evolving with each successor. The tower was its headquarters, the hidden houses its outposts, and Mistwood itself the canvas. She understood now. To stop it, she had to dismantle the entire network, the houses, the records, and most importantly, the people who continued the spiral. Her investigation was no longer just about uncovering a killer. It was about confronting a system that had survived a century. And if she failed, she could become the next point in the spiral of judgment. Claire stood, looking over the foggy forest, the bridge in the distance, and the town that seemed so quiet, so unaware. The spiral was still alive, and now it had marked her. Mistwood had always appeared peaceful to outsiders, a quaint town tucked between rolling hills and dense forests, where life moved slowly and doors remained unlocked. But Claire Dawson now knew the truth. The town's serene facade masked a darkness, so deep it had persisted for over a century. The spiral was not just the work of one person or even one family. It was a network embedded in the very town itself. And uncovering it would require more than courage. It would require trust in those she could barely believe weren't already complicit. Back to the hidden house. Claire returned to the hidden house under the cover of early morning fog. The basement had been cleared, but the evidence was still there. The shrine, the spiral pattern, and the shelves of preserved items. She had spent the previous night tracing every lead, every date, every pin on the spiral map. And she had begun to see a horrifying pattern. Every disappearance was linked not just geographically but socially. Victims were often connected to town families, sometimes distantly, sometimes directly. Their parents, their friends, even their workplaces, all tied in some way to families whose names repeatedly appeared in the town's archived records. This was a network that had been grooming the town for generations. A meeting with an insider. Claire had arranged to meet someone who might have answers. A retired police officer named Henry Larkin, who had served in Mistwood for 40 years. He had taken early retirement, citing personal reasons, but Claire believed he had quietly witnessed the spiral's operation over decades. She found Larkin at a small, weathered cabin on the outskirts of town. He opened the door slowly, his eyes wary. "You're the podcaster," he said flatly. "I've heard whispers about you poking around the bridge and the forest. You shouldn't be here." "I need the truth," Claire said firmly. "About the disappearances. About Mistwood." Larkin's eyes softened, but a shadow of fear remained. "The town protects itself. The spiral, it's bigger than you think. Bigger than me. Bigger than anyone alive today wants to admit." Claire stepped closer, determined. "Then help me. If this network is still active, people will die. Help me stop it." Larkin sighed heavily and gestured for her to enter. Inside, the cabin was cluttered with files, old maps, and photographs, the same kinds of evidence Claire had seen in the hidden house. "The spiral has rules," he said. "Every generation, it needs to be renewed. New families are recruited. New victims are chosen based on their proximity, their lineage, and their connections. The town turns a blind eye, or worse, some actively assist. Claire felt her stomach twist. The town knows? Not all of them, Larkin said. Some are too afraid to speak. Others, they're complicit. The spiral thrives because everyone plays a role, whether they know it or not. The Council of Mistwood. Larkin revealed something more terrifying. A secret council had historically overseen the spiral. Composed of influential families, the council determined who would vanish next and ensured the pattern continued. Records of their decisions were hidden, distributed across the town in safe houses like the one Claire had discovered. They've been doing this for decades, Larkin said. The spiral is a test of obedience, loyalty, and silence. Anyone who resists disappears. Claire realized that every lead, every clue she had found, was designed not just to hide the spiral, but to test intruders. The spiral maps, the hidden houses, the locket and journals, they were part of a labyrinth, a gauntlet designed to filter out those who weren't smart, brave, or persistent enough to stop it. The most recent victim. Claire brought up details of the young man found in the forest. Larkin frowned as he scanned her notes. Yes, he said quietly. He had no connection to the town, on the surface. But someone in the council, they chose him anyway. A random outsider. Perhaps a mistake, or perhaps a warning to you. Claire's blood ran cold. So the spiral isn't limited to Mistwood families anymore? Not entirely, Larkin admitted. Once someone notices the pattern, the spiral adapts. It evolves. The network doesn't care who the victim is. Only that the spiral continues, that the order remains. The hidden connections. Claire and Larkin began mapping the families involved, cross-referencing property records, school histories, and old council documents. The connections were unmistakable. Multiple disappearances tied back to specific families, often spanning 3 or 4 generations. The spiral wasn't just killings, it was manipulation, coercion, and social engineering. A family would quietly gain influence over the town, owning businesses, guiding the police, controlling the schools. Their members would act as facilitators, recruiters, or guards, ensuring the spiral never broke its pattern. Claire stared at the wall of files, feeling the weight of the conspiracy. The town itself was a participant, a web of silence and complicity. And the spiral had been grooming her from the very beginning. A town in fear. Larkin warned Claire of another chilling aspect. Mistwood's residents were terrified of the spiral. Most knew something was wrong, but fear kept them silent. People disappear, Larkin said. No one asks questions. Some families even take pride in their role. Others, they just survive by keeping quiet. Claire realized she could not trust anyone in the town. Not shopkeepers, not neighbors, not even the police. The spiral's influence was pervasive, subtle, and relentless. Every corner of Mistwood, every foggy road, every abandoned building could harbor another piece of the system. The next step. As the fog thickened outside, Claire made a decision. To stop the spiral, she needed to find the next likely target and intervene before the pattern continued. She had predicted the next point on the spiral map. A small house on the outskirts of town, isolated and unguarded, based on the geometric expansion she had traced. This is it, she said quietly to herself. If I can save the next victim, I can begin dismantling the spiral. Larkin placed a hand on her shoulder. Be careful. The town doesn't forgive trespassers. And the spiral, it bites back. Claire nodded, steeling herself. She had already seen the tower, traced the spiral, and begun mapping the network. But nothing prepared her for what awaited at the next target. A revelation that would shake the very foundation of Mistwood and force her to confront the spiral's true power. As she stepped back into the fog, she knew one thing with certainty. The spiral was no longer just a mystery. It was a living, breathing force, and she had to face it head-on. The fog hung thick over Mistwood like a cloak of secrets, pressing into every street, alley, and forest path. Claire Dawson had been awake for nearly 48 hours, following every lead, reviewing every file, and tracing the spiral map across town. Every step brought her closer to the truth, and closer to danger. The next point on the spiral was clear. A secluded house on the edge of town, where the pattern predicted the next victim would be targeted. But Claire knew she couldn't simply wait for another tragedy to unfold. She needed answers, and she needed them now. The shadow of the mastermind. Her investigation had led her to one undeniable conclusion. The spiral wasn't just the work of a single obsessed individual. It had been born from Victor Harrow's tower over a century ago, but the system had survived him. Someone alive today had maintained the spiral, choosing victims, preserving the network, and manipulating Mistwood to continue the cycle. Claire called this figure in her mind the architect. The architect wasn't just a murderer, they were a strategist, a manipulator, a living ledger of every disappearance. And now Claire realized they had noticed her. The notes, the warnings, the locket, all were meant to test her, gauge her resolve, and perhaps, in their mind, induct her into the pattern or eliminate her. A secret informant, Henry Larkin, the retired officer, had agreed to meet Claire once more. This time he brought something new, a series of old council meeting records, hidden in the folds of his cabin. "Claire," he said, handing her the files, "if we're going to expose the spiral, you need to know who we're dealing with." The council didn't just pick victims. They controlled everything. And one person, one family, has dominated the spiral for the last 3 generations. Claire flipped through the pages. Names she recognized immediately. The Harrows, the Lincolns, the Prescott family. But one name kept appearing, recurring like a refrain in the pattern. Evelyn Harrow. "Evelyn?" Claire asked. "Related to Victor Harrow?" Larkin nodded. "Victor's great-granddaughter. She's been alive for 82 years. She's cunning, brilliant, and terrifying. The network's knowledge, its timing, its ruthlessness, she keeps it alive. If anyone can trace the spiral and manipulate Mistwood from the shadows, it's her." Tracing Evelyn Harrow. Using property records, historical data, and old maps, Claire pieced together Evelyn's movements. Unlike her ancestors, Evelyn wasn't confined to the tower. She had influence across Mistwood, controlling or coercing families into compliance, maintaining safe houses, and orchestrating disappearances according to the spiral's blueprint. Even the most recent victim, the young man in the forest, was chosen under her guidance. His death wasn't personal, it was strategic, a continuation of the spiral. Claire realized that Evelyn had been orchestrating these disappearances her entire life. Her name appeared in old journals, letters, and newspaper mentions, often dismissed as coincidence. But the evidence now painted a chilling portrait. Evelyn Harrow was the living architect of the spiral. The confrontation plan. Claire knew she couldn't confront Evelyn directly without preparation. Evelyn had lived in Mistwood for decades, mastering patience, fear, and manipulation. Any misstep could cost Claire her life. Using her spiral map, Claire identified the next likely location of a victim. A small cabin along the forest's edge, far enough from town to prevent interference. If she could intervene there, she could protect the victim and perhaps force Evelyn out of the shadows. Claire prepared camera, recorder, flashlight, and a small first aid kit. She carried nothing else. She needed mobility, stealth, and awareness. This was no longer about investigation. It was about survival and justice. The cabin stakeout. Night fell as Claire reached the cabin. Fog swirled around the trees, turning the forest into a labyrinth of gray shadows. She hid behind an overgrown bush, eyes fixed on the cabin. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig set her nerves on edge. Hours passed. Then, faint movement, a figure approaching through the mist. Claire's heart raced. This wasn't the victim, it was someone else, deliberate and measured in every step. She followed silently, crouched low, careful not to make a sound. The figure stopped at the cabin door, producing a key. Claire's mind raced. This had to be Evelyn, or one of her operatives. Suddenly, the figure paused, listening. Claire saw a flicker of awareness, almost as if the architect knew she was nearby. The trap revealed. Claire stayed hidden, watching as the figure entered the cabin. Through the window, she could see preparations, ropes, restraints, and markings consistent with the spiral's rituals. This was not random, it was meticulous, deliberate, and cold. The victim, a young woman, unaware of the danger, was guided toward the preparations. Claire's stomach turned, but she forced herself to act. She couldn't wait for Evelyn to finish her work. Slipping inside through the back, Claire quietly subdued the operative, one of Evelyn's assistants, and freed the young woman. Her heart pounded as she dragged her outside, the fog swallowing them as they ran into the trees. Somewhere in the darkness, a voice whispered, "You've seen too much, Claire Dawson." It was Evelyn. The architect steps forward. Claire spun, flashlight in hand. Emerging from the mist, Evelyn Harrow stood tall, eyes cold and calculating. Despite her age, there was an aura of power and control that made Claire instinctively step back. "You've traced the spiral," Evelyn said softly, almost admiringly. "And now you want to stop it?" "I will stop it," Claire replied firmly, keeping her distance. "Your reign ends tonight." Evelyn smiled, the kind of smile that chilled the bone. "You think you understand, but the spiral is bigger than me. Bigger than Mistwood. Bigger than time itself. You cannot destroy what has been meticulously planned for over a century." Claire's hands clenched around her flashlight. "Maybe not alone, but I have enough evidence to expose you. The hidden houses, the tower, the records, the victims. The world will know the truth." Evelyn laughed softly, a sound that was both charming and terrifying. "The world can know, yes, but the spiral doesn't care what the world knows. The spiral always moves forward, and now you are part of it. The chase begins." Before Claire could react, Evelyn disappeared into the fog. It was like she had melted into the night itself. The operative she had subdued began to stir, groaning in pain. Claire knew the architect had more allies, more hidden observers. She had saved the young woman, but Evelyn had vanished, her presence lingering like a shadow over Mistwood. Claire realized that uncovering Evelyn's identity was only the first step. To truly stop the spiral, she would have to dismantle the network she had built over decades, and survive the web of deception, fear, and control she had spun. As the fog pressed in, Claire Dawson made a silent vow. The spiral would end. The architect would be revealed to the world, and Mistwood, long held hostage by fear, would finally see the truth. But Claire also knew one terrifying fact. Evelyn Harrow was patient, ruthless, and the spiral, like time itself, would not be broken easily. The fog had lifted from Mistwood by morning, revealing streets that seemed innocuous, even calm. But Claire Dawson knew better. Beneath the town's quiet streets and manicured lawns lay a network of manipulation, coercion, and ritualized disappearances. A living mechanism powered by fear and secrecy. And now, she was on the brink of discovering its final piece, the mechanism that controlled the spiral. Return to the tower. Claire began her day at the tower, retracing her steps from her last confrontation with Evelyn Harrow. The observation deck, where she had seen the pedestal diary, seemed almost serene in daylight, but Claire knew better. The spiral was still alive, ticking invisibly through the town. She descended cautiously, flashlight in hand, inspecting every stair, alcove, and floor for clues she might have missed. On the second landing, tucked behind a false wall panel, she discovered a hidden compartment, a small wooden box, locked but fragile. With careful hands, she pried it open. Inside were blueprints and journals unlike any she had seen before. They detailed the spiral in terrifying precision. Locations, timing, routes, communication methods, and even contingency plans if someone interfered. And then she saw it. A diagram marked the final mechanism. Understanding the mechanism, Claire studied the diagram. The mechanism wasn't a machine in the traditional sense. It was a system, a layered, coordinated network of surveillance, communication, and manipulation that allowed Evelyn Harrow to maintain control over the spiral. The mechanism had three components: observation posts, hidden houses, abandoned structures, and lookout points scattered across Mistwood, each monitoring specific locations and reporting to the tower. Communication network, a combination of letters, coded signals, and operatives moving through the town to relay information about potential victims and maintain order within the network. Timing protocols, a precise schedule based on the spiral's expansion and historical patterns, dictating when and where disappearances occurred, ensuring the pattern remained unbroken over decades. Claire's hands shook as she realized the depth of Evelyn's control. This mechanism had allowed the spiral to survive for over a century, uninterrupted, adapting with each new generation. A hidden room. The blueprints led Claire to a previously undiscovered area of the tower. A hidden room beneath the observation deck, accessible through a narrow staircase concealed by bookshelves. The air was damp and cold, and the faint smell of old paper and rust filled the space. Inside, she found rows of filing cabinets, each meticulously labeled with dates, names, and locations. Shelves held boxes containing personal items from victims, letters, trinkets, even clothing. Every item was cataloged, linked to the spiral pattern, and stored as part of Evelyn's control system. Claire realized this was the heart of the final mechanism, a physical repository that allowed the spiral to function with eerie precision. This room was Evelyn's brain, her archive, and her power. The surveillance network. Claire examined further and discovered a series of maps with red pins and coded annotations, some matching the spiral diagram she had already traced, others marking roads, forest paths, and houses that seemed innocuous. She realized these were surveillance nodes. Hidden operatives had been monitoring the town for decades, reporting movements, checking for potential witnesses, and maintaining the secrecy of the spiral. Even Mistwood's police force, businesses, and town council had been infiltrated or influenced, ensuring that the pattern could continue without interference. The spiral wasn't just murder, it was social engineering on a massive scale. A trap uncovered. As Claire studied the room, a noise behind her made her freeze. A faint creak, almost imperceptible but deliberate. She turned and saw a shadow moving in the corner. "Impressive," said a voice, smooth and controlled. "You've discovered the final mechanism." Claire spun her flashlight toward the sound. Evelyn Harrow emerged from the shadows, her presence commanding and terrifying despite her age. "You've gone further than I expected," Evelyn continued. "Most would have stopped at the hidden house, at the spiral pattern. But you've seen the heart of it all. And now, you understand why the spiral cannot be broken." "I can stop it," Claire said, keeping her voice steady. "All of this, your network, your archives, your operatives, it ends tonight." Evelyn's eyes glimmered with a chilling amusement. "End? The spiral doesn't end. It evolves. You may destroy this room, these records, but the spiral has already extended beyond Mistwood. Its influence has seeped into other towns, other families. You're too late to stop it entirely." Confrontation in the heart of the mechanism. Claire realized she had only one chance. She couldn't confront Evelyn physically. The woman had decades of experience, manipulative skill, and control over the spiral's network. But she could expose her. She quickly began photographing everything, the blueprints, the records, the surveillance maps. She recorded Evelyn on her small recorder, letting the woman's own words reveal the depth of the spiral. Evelyn noticed the action, her calm demeanor flickering with irritation. "Recording me? Clever. But futile. The spiral moves on, regardless of what a few photographs or recordings reveal. And you, my dear, are part of it now." Claire ignored the warning. She knew that exposing Evelyn publicly was the only way to break the network. The spiral relied on secrecy and fear. Once revealed, its foundation would crack. Escape under fire. Suddenly, a hidden door creaked open behind Claire. One of Evelyn's operatives appeared, knife in hand. Claire acted instinctively, throwing the first object at the attacker and sprinting toward the tower's stairwell. Evelyn's voice echoed after her. "You cannot outrun time, Claire Dawson. The spiral will claim you." Claire reached the base of the tower, breathless but determined. She had survived the confrontation, obtained photographic and recorded evidence, and now had a plan to expose the spiral to the world. The spiral's machinery exposed. Outside, the forest seemed quiet, almost deceptively calm. Claire knew the final mechanism had been revealed, but the spiral itself was still alive. The town remained a web of complicity, fear, and tradition. She would need allies to dismantle the network, and she would need courage to confront the architect again. But Claire's resolve hardened. She had seen the spiral's heart, she had faced Evelyn, and she now had proof of the network's existence. The final mechanism had been discovered, but the battle to dismantle the spiral was only beginning. The fog had returned to Mistwood, thick and oppressive, as if the town itself sensed the coming reckoning. Claire Dawson moved with precision, her every step calculated. She had spent days analyzing the spiral's network, tracing the final mechanism, and planning a way to dismantle Evelyn Harrow's century-old web of terror. Now the time had come. The spiral was about to collapse, and Claire knew it would not go quietly. Rallying allies. Claire could not do this alone. She contacted Henry Larkin, the retired officer, who agreed to help coordinate a few trusted allies, journalists, a cybersecurity expert, and a local historian who had knowledge of Mistwood's hidden infrastructure. Together, they formed a strike team, tasked with exposing Evelyn's network, securing the evidence, and protecting potential victims. Claire shared everything she had collected: photographs, diaries, blueprints of the tower, and the spiral maps. "This network is like a living organism," Claire explained, pointing to the spiral diagram spread across the table. "If we cut off its head, the tower and Evelyn, and disrupt its limbs, the hidden houses, operatives, and surveillance nodes, we can collapse it entirely." Larkin nodded gravely. "But the network will fight back. Evelyn has eyes everywhere. We need to move carefully, or the spiral will consume us all." The operation begins. Under the cover of night, Claire and the team set their plan into motion. Their first objective, the tower, the heart of the spiral. The blueprints Claire had discovered allowed them to navigate the hidden rooms and staircases, bypassing traps and surveillance. Inside, they began photographing and cataloging evidence. Every file, box, and journal was secured. Every photograph, every trinket from victims, and every map was documented. They were exposing decades of carefully orchestrated terror to the world. Claire felt a surge of determination. The spiral had survived centuries, but it had never faced an organized, relentless assault like this. The spiral strikes back. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the tower. One of Evelyn's operatives had discovered their intrusion. Claire and the team ducked behind pillars as shadows moved along the stairwell, knives glinting in the dim light. Claire whispered into her radio, directing the team. "Split into pairs. Secure the evidence and prepare for extraction. We cannot lose anything." The operatives moved swiftly and silently, but Claire's team was prepared. After a tense confrontation, they subdued the intruders and secured the stairwells. But the incident made it clear. Evelyn's network was still alive, still dangerous, and still capable of violence. The architect emerges. At the top of the tower, Claire found Evelyn waiting. The room was empty except for a small pedestal, atop which rested the master journal, the culmination of her lifetime's work orchestrating the spiral. "You've come far, Claire," Evelyn said, her voice calm and measured. "But you underestimate the spiral. It is bigger than Mistwood. It is bigger than you. Even if you destroy this tower, the pattern continues." Claire stepped forward, defiant. "The spiral ends tonight, Evelyn. Your network is exposed. Your victims will be freed, and the world will know the truth." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "Do you truly believe that? You've seen only a fraction of my reach. Mistwood is just the beginning." Claire held her recorder high. "Then the world will hear it. Every secret, every disappearance, every twisted calculation you made. Confrontation and collapse." The confrontation escalated quickly. Evelyn lunged toward the pedestal, attempting to retrieve her master journal. Claire intercepted, pushing her back. A struggle ensued, the two women grappling amid the tower's shadows. Outside, the rest of the team secured the lower floors, dismantling hidden surveillance devices and collecting evidence from the filing cabinets. The network was crumbling under their systematic assault. With a final, desperate push, Claire pinned Evelyn against the wall, wrenching the journal from her hands. Evelyn hissed, eyes burning with fury, but the spiral's machinery, the network, the hidden houses, the surveillance nodes, was collapsing in real time. The operatives outside were apprehended. The hidden houses were exposed. The files documenting decades of disappearances were copied and secured. The spiral, once untouchable, was finally vulnerable. Evelyn's last stand. Evelyn stood, breathing heavily but still composed. "You may think you've won," she said, voice low and dangerous. "But the spiral has already spread. Others will continue my work. You cannot end it entirely." Claire looked her in the eye. "Maybe not entirely, but I've stopped you, and anyone who tries to continue will face justice. The spiral dies here, Evelyn. Your control ends now." The authorities, informed and ready, arrived moments later. Evelyn was taken into custody, her operatives arrested. The tower, once a fortress of terror, was now secured, its secrets laid bare for investigators to catalog and preserve. Aftermath of the collapse. As dawn broke over Mistwood, Claire and her team surveyed the town. The spiral had been dismantled, the network exposed, and Evelyn Harrow neutralized. Mistwood would never be the same. The fog lifted, revealing streets filled with sunlight for the first time in decades. Claire knew the fight was not over entirely. The spiral had taken decades of lives and left scars on the town, but the collapse of the network marked a turning point. Mistwood could begin to heal. Claire stood on Mistwood Bridge, looking over the flowing river below. She thought of the victims, the hidden houses, the tower, and the spiral that had haunted the town for over a century. She knew justice was never simple, but today it had prevailed. For the first time, Claire felt a measure of peace. The spiral had collapsed. Evelyn Harrow had been stopped, and Mistwood, long shrouded in secrets, could finally breathe. The sun rose over Mistwood, cutting through the lingering morning fog that had haunted the town for decades. Streets that had once seemed empty and silent now pulsed with cautious life. Windows opened, doors unlocked, and for the first time in over a century, Mistwood felt free. Claire Dawson stood at the edge of the forest, looking down at the bridge where so many had vanished over the years. The spiral, the network that had terrorized the town for generations, was finally dismantled. Evelyn Harrow, the architect who had maintained control with ruthless precision, was in custody, and her operatives were either arrested or had fled into hiding. But the echoes of her legacy remained, stitched into the fabric of Mistwood itself. The town reacts. News of the spiral's exposure spread quickly. Investigators, journalists, and historians poured into Mistwood. Every hidden house, every abandoned building, every secret cache revealed decades of meticulous documentation. Files, photographs, journals, and trinkets belonging to victims long forgotten. The town's residents were forced to confront the truth. Families who had once quietly complied with the spiral were publicly exposed. Some expressed horror, others shame, and a few admitted complicity. The town's complicity, whether through fear or willful ignorance, was laid bare. Claire watched as Mistwood struggled to process the revelations. Shops reopened, streets buzzed with conversation, and the children played without the shadow of fear over them for the first time in decades. But the scars of the spiral would linger. Memories of lost friends, missing neighbors, and the knowledge that generations of Mistwood had been silently complicit in a hidden terror. Evelyn Harrow's trial. Evelyn's trial was swift and intense. The evidence collected by Claire and her allies left no room for doubt. Photographs, diaries, blueprints, and testimony revealed the breadth and depth of the spiral network. For decades, she had orchestrated disappearances, manipulated families, and maintained a secret network that reached into every corner of the town. During the trial, Evelyn remained calm, even defiant. "The spiral is eternal," she told the courtroom. "You may punish me, but the pattern is larger than me, larger than this town. You cannot end what is inevitable." But the jury saw the human cost. They saw the victims, the families, the meticulous cruelty, and the decades of fear. When the verdict came, Evelyn Harrow was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Her operatives received long sentences, and the town began a long process of restitution and healing. Claire's reflection. In the weeks following the trial, Claire returned to the forest and the sites of the spiral's hidden houses. She documented everything, ensuring that the spiral's history was preserved so that it could never be repeated. She thought of every victim, the young man lost in the forest, the families manipulated over generations, and the countless others whose lives had been stolen or ruined by Evelyn's network. Claire knew justice could never fully restore what was lost, but she also knew that exposure, acknowledgement, and memory were crucial steps toward healing. The town rebuilds. Mistwood slowly began to rebuild. The tower, once a symbol of terror, was secured and transformed into a historical archive. Hidden houses were repurposed or destroyed, erasing the last physical remnants of the spiral's network. Families who had once been silent witnesses began speaking out, offering testimony and sharing memories of the town's dark history. Community programs were established to support victims' families and educate the next generation about the dangers of secrecy, fear, and blind obedience. Mistwood's residents had survived centuries of manipulation, and now they were reclaiming their town, one street, one home, one story at a time. A personal victory. Claire stood once more on Mistwood Bridge, the river flowing steadily below. She thought of the spiral, the tower, the hidden houses, the network, and Evelyn Harrow herself. It had been the most dangerous, intricate investigation of her career, but she had succeeded. She breathed deeply, feeling the weight of decades of fear lifting from her shoulders. Justice had been served, the spiral had collapsed, and Mistwood could finally face a future free from the shadows of its past. Claire knew that stories like this never truly ended. They echoed through the town, through history, and through memory. But she also knew that by shining a light on the darkness, she had made a difference. For the victims, for the families, for Mistwood, the spiral had been broken. Justice had been delivered, and Mistwood, for the first time in over a century, could finally begin to heal.